Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Daniel Mountainheart, but everyone calls me Danny. I've been a ranger in Daniel Boone National Forest for 19 years now, 43 years old, gray starting to show in my beard, and I thought I'd seen everything these Kentucky mountains could throw at me. I was wrong. My daddy was half Cherokee, and my mama was Scots-Irish. Growing up, I heard all the old stories about things that lived deep in these mountains, things that weren't quite animal and weren't quite human. The Cherokee called them by names I can't pronounce right, and the mountain folk had their own tales about devils and monsters hiding in the hollers. I never believed any of it. 19 years of walking these trails, sleeping under these stars, and tracking every kind of animal from black bears to bobcats. Never saw anything that couldn't be explained by good old-fashioned science and common sense. But I should have listened to those old stories. Should have paid attention when my Cherokee grandmother would get that look in her eyes and tell me about the Kekla Kudla, the beast that walks like a man but hunts like a devil. It was late October 1971, and we'd gotten our first dusting of snow up on the ridges. Bow hunting season was in full swing, which meant more people heading into the deep woods than usual. Pine Mountain section, near Cumberland Gap, where the elevation pushes past 3,000 feet, and the hollows run so deep that sunlight barely touches the bottom even at noon. That's when the reports started coming in. First call came on a Tuesday. 3 bow hunters had set up camp near Lone Pine Ridge, about 8 miles from the nearest access road. They radioed in around midnight, voices shaky and high-pitched like men trying not to sound scared. "Ranger Station, this is Hunting Party Delta 7. We're hearing a woman screaming out here. Sounds like she's being skinned alive, if you'll pardon the expression. It's been going on for 2 hours now." I was on duty that night, manning the radio. "Copy that, Delta 7. Can you give me a direction on the sound?" "That's the thing, Ranger. It's coming from all around us. Echoing off the ridges something fierce. But it ain't natural. No woman should be able to scream like that for 2 hours straight." I told them it was probably an elk bugling or maybe a mountain lion. Both can make sounds that'll raise the hair on your neck if you're not used to them. The hunters didn't sound convinced, but they agreed to sit tight until morning. Wednesday brought 2 more calls, different hunting parties, different sections of the same general area, all reporting the same thing, a woman screaming in agony, echoing through the mountains for hours at a time. By Thursday, when the 4th call came in, I knew I had to go check it out myself. The thing about being a ranger is that you're part lawman, part search and rescue, part wildlife expert, and part babysitter for city folks who get in over their heads in the wilderness. Most calls turn out to be nothing. Campers spooked by normal forest sounds, hikers who took a wrong turn, hunters who've had a few too many beers around the campfire. But 4 separate reports of the same phenomenon? That was worth investigating. I packed my standard gear that Friday morning. CB radio, Coleman lantern, extra batteries, first aid kit, emergency flares, and my trusty .30-06 rifle. The weather forecast called for clear skies and temperatures in the 30s. Cold, but not dangerous if you dressed right and kept moving. My supervisor, Joe Hensley, stopped by my truck as I was loading up. "You really think you need to hike all the way out to Lone Pine Ridge for some spooked hunters?" he asked, lighting up one of those cheap cigars he was always smoking. "Probably not," then I admitted, but 4 separate reports means something's got them stirred up. Could be a rabid animal, could be someone hurt and calling for help. Either way, I need to check it out. Joe nodded. "You know the drill. Radio check every 2 hours. If I don't hear from you by 6 tonight, I'm sending a search party." I checked my watch. 8:30 a.m. "Copy that. Should be an easy day hike." The trail to Lone Pine Ridge started out familiar enough. I'd walked it dozens of times over the years, knew every switchback and creek crossing. The first 4 miles were easy going, following an old logging road that had grown over with saplings and blackberry briars. But as I got deeper into the mountains, something started feeling wrong. It was too quiet. Now, late October in Kentucky, you should be hearing birds getting ready for winter. Squirrels chattering as they gather nuts. Maybe the distant hammering of a pileated woodpecker or the rustle of deer moving through the underbrush. I wasn't hearing any of that. The only sounds were my own footsteps crunching through the leaves and the whisper of wind through the pine branches. Even the insects were silent. In 19 years of ranging, I'd never experienced anything like it. It was like every living thing in those mountains had just left. By noon, I'd covered 6 miles and reached the turnoff for Lone Pine Ridge. The main trail continued north toward Cumberland Gap, but a fainter path branched off to the east, winding up through dense rhododendron thickets toward the ridge where the hunters had been camping. I stopped for lunch and tried my first radio check. "Base station, this is Danny. Radio check, over." Static crackled from the speaker, but no response. I adjusted the frequency and tried again. "Base station, this is Ranger Mountain Heart. Radio check, over." More static, and then Joe's voice came through, faint but clear. "Copy, Danny. How's it looking out there?" "Quiet. Too quiet. Haven't seen or heard any wildlife for the past 2 hours. Could be they've moved to lower elevations with the weather change. Or maybe there's a predator in the area keeping everything spooked," Joe suggested. "You find those hunters yet?" "Negative. Still got about 2 miles to go. I'll check in again at 1400 hours." "Copy that. Stay safe out there." The path up to Lone Pine Ridge was steeper and more overgrown than I remembered. Rhododendron branches grabbed at my jacket, and fallen logs blocked the trail every few hundred yards. It was the kind of terrain that made you watch every step, which is probably why I almost missed the first sign that something was seriously wrong. Claw marks, deep gouges in the bark of a massive oak tree, starting about 12 feet off the ground and running down to about 8 feet. 4 parallel gashes, each one as wide as my thumb and cut so deep they'd reached the heartwood. I'd seen plenty of bear sign in my time, but bears don't typically mark trees that high up. A full-grown black bear might reach 7 or 8 feet standing on its hind legs, but these marks started at 12 feet. I took out my measuring tape and notebook, documenting everything the way I'd been trained. The marks were fresh, sap still sticky, wood shavings scattered on the ground below. Whatever made them had been here within the last day or two. As I knelt to examine the wood chips, that's when I caught the smell. It was like nothing I'd ever encountered before. Part decay, like something that had been dead for weeks. Part sulfur, like rotten eggs. And underneath it all, something else. Something that made my stomach turn and my skin crawl. I'd smelled death before, found plenty of deer that had died of disease or old age, discovered the occasional hiker who'd had a heart attack on the trail. But this was different. This smell seemed to reach right into your brain and flip some primitive switch that said, danger. The hunting camp was another half-mile up the ridge, and I could smell, all that awful stench getting stronger with every step. When I finally reached the campsite, I understood why the hunters had been so spooked. The camp was destroyed, not damaged, destroyed, like something had hit it with the fury of a tornado. The tent was shredded, long strips of orange nylon scattered across a 100-foot area. Sleeping bags had been torn apart, white stuffing caught in tree branches 20 feet off the ground. A cooler had been crushed flat, and canned food was scattered everywhere, most of the cans punctured by what looked like huge claws. But here's the thing that made my hands start shaking. There were no hunters. I called out, thinking maybe they'd taken shelter somewhere nearby. "Hello? Forest Service. Anyone out there?" My voice echoed off the ridges and died away. No answer. I started searching the area systematically, looking for any sign of the 3 men who'd been camping here. That's when I found the tracks. They weren't human tracks, and they weren't from any animal I'd ever seen. 18 inches long, narrow like a human footprint, but with deep claw marks at the toe end. The stride was impossibly long, 7 feet between prints, and they were pressed deep into the soft earth like whatever made them weighed a lot more than it should have. The tracks circled the destroyed campsite 3 times, then headed straight up the ridge toward an area of limestone cliffs and caves. I followed them for about 50 yards before I found the first body. His name was Jim Carver, according to the hunting license in his wallet. 34 years old, from Lexington, married with 2 kids. He was wedged 20 feet up in the fork of a white oak, and at first I thought maybe he'd climbed up there trying to escape from whatever had destroyed the camp. Then I got close enough to see what had been done to him. His chest had been opened cleanly, almost surgically. Ribs spread apart like he'd been prepared for an autopsy. And his heart was gone. Not torn out, not chewed up. Gone. Cut away with the precision of a skilled butcher. I've seen what bears and mountain lions can do to a human body, and this wasn't that. This was something else entirely. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the camera out of my pack to document the scene. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get out of there, to run back down the mountain as fast as my legs could carry me. But I had a job to do. 2 more hunters were missing, and if there was any chance they were still alive, I had to find them. That's when I heard my brother's voice calling my name. "Danny! Danny, help me!" The voice was coming from deeper up the ridge, from the direction of the limestone caves. It sounded exactly like Tommy, my brother who'd died in these same mountains 15 years ago, killed by what the official report called a bear attack, though we never found enough of him to be sure. "Danny, I'm hurt bad. Please help me." Every rational part of my brain knew it wasn't really Tommy, knew it couldn't be. But the voice was perfect. The same Kentucky accent, the same way he used to say my name when we were kids and he'd gotten himself into trouble. I started moving toward the sound, my rifle ready but my hands still shaking. "Keep talking, Tommy, I'm coming." "Over here, Danny, in the cave, I can't move." The voice led me up a steep slope covered with loose shale and stunted pine trees. At the top, a series of limestone caves opened into the mountainside like hungry mouths. That's when I realized I was being hunted. The voice stopped as soon as I reached the cave entrance. Not gradually, like someone getting tired of calling. Just stopped, mid-sentence, like someone had thrown a switch. I stood at the mouth of the largest cave, my Coleman lantern casting weird shadows on the limestone walls, and tried to make sense of what was happening. The smell was stronger here, that mix of decay and sulfur that made my stomach churn. "Hello?" I called, into the darkness. "Anyone in there?" The echo came back distorted, like the cave walls were made of something that bent sound in unnatural ways. I'd been in plenty of caves during my 19 years as a ranger. Rescued lost spelunkers, searched for missing hikers, even spent a few nights underground when the weather turned bad. But this felt different. The darkness seemed thick, almost solid, like it was pushing back against my lantern light. 20 feet into the cave, I found the symbols. They were scratched into the limestone walls, each one about 3 feet high. Not random claw marks, deliberate designs that hurt to look at directly. Angular shapes that seemed to twist and move when I wasn't looking straight at them. Looking at those symbols made me dizzy, made me feel like the cave floor was tilting under my feet. I had to grab the wall to keep from falling over, and the moment my hand touched the stone, images flashed through my mind. Tommy, 15 years ago, standing in this same cave. Tommy seeing something moving in the darkness beyond his flashlight beam. Tommy screaming as claws longer than kitchen knives opened his throat. I jerked my hand away from the wall and stumbled backward, my heart hammering in my chest. The visions felt more real than my own memories. That's when I heard the breathing, deep, slow, and coming from somewhere deeper in the cave. Each breath sounded like wind moving through a tunnel, but with a wet, organic quality that raised the hair on my neck. I should have left right then, should have backed out of that cave, hiked down the mountain, and called for backup. But I kept thinking about those 2 missing hunters. Kept hearing that voice that sounded exactly like Tommy. "Forest Service," I called into the darkness. "If there's anyone back there, I'm here to help." The breathing stopped. For maybe 30 seconds, there was complete silence. Then I heard something that made my blood freeze in my veins. Laughter, low and rumbling like rocks falling down a mountainside. But underneath that sound was something else, something that sounded almost human but wrong in every way that mattered. I raised my rifle and started backing toward the cave entrance. "I'm armed! Identify yourself!" The laughter got louder, and now I could hear movement. Something big shifting around in the darkness beyond my lantern light. Not the scrabble of claws on stone, but the deliberate movement of something that knew exactly where it was going. I made it about 10 feet before my lantern went out. Not dimmed, not flickered, just died instantly, like someone had unplugged it from the wall. I was plunged into absolute darkness, the kind of black you only find deep underground where no sunlight has ever reached. I fumbled for my spare flashlight, trying to keep my rifle pointed into the cave while I dug through my pack. My hands were shaking so bad I dropped the flashlight twice before I managed to turn it on. The beam showed me an empty cave. No breathing sounds, no movement, nothing but limestone walls and that awful smell that seemed to be getting stronger. But scratched into the cave floor, right where I'd been standing, were fresh claw marks. 4 parallel gouges, each one 6 inches long and deep enough that they'd have to have been made with tremendous force. Whatever had made them had been standing close enough to touch me. I ran, stumbled, and scrambled out of that cave as fast as I could move, my flashlight beam dancing wildly as I tried to watch for obstacles. Behind me, I could hear that laughter getting louder, echoing off the cave walls until it sounded like a dozen voices instead of one. I made it maybe 100 yards down the ridge before I found the second hunter. This one had tried to run too. His name was Pete Hawkins, according to his driver's license. 28 years old, from Louisville. He'd made it almost to the main trail before whatever was chasing him caught up. He was buried, under a pile of leaves and branches, like something had tried to hide the body for later. But scavengers had found him first. What was left wasn't pretty. Like the first hunter, his chest had been opened with surgical precision, heart gone. But this time, the liver was missing too. I was documenting the scene with my camera when I heard my name again. Danny. Not shouted this time, just my name, spoken quietly, like someone standing right behind me. I spun around, rifle ready, but there was nothing there, just empty forest and that unnatural silence that had been following me all day. Danny. This time it came from my left. Still in Tommy's voice, but different somehow. Colder, like Tommy might sound if he'd been dead for 15 years. "I know what you are," I said to the empty forest. "I know you're not my brother." The response came from 3 different directions at once, Tommy's voice creating an impossible harmony with itself. "But I am your brother, Danny. I've been waiting for you. Waiting in the dark." My radio crackled to life. "Base station to Ranger Mountain Heart. Radio check. Over." I grabbed for the handset, desperate to hear another human voice. "Base station, this is Danny. I need backup up here. I need..." Static drowned out my words. When it cleared, instead of Joe's voice, I heard something else coming through the speaker, screaming. A woman's voice, just like the hunters had described, screaming like she was being torn apart piece by piece. But underneath the screaming, barely audible, I could hear other voices whispering my name. I turned the radio off and threw it as far as I could into the underbrush. That's when I realized I was lost. The trail that should have led back down the mountain was gone. Not overgrown, not blocked by fallen trees, just gone, like it had never existed. My compass spun wildly, the needle pointing in different directions every few seconds. Every landmark I'd used to navigate up the ridge had changed. The distinctive split-trunk maple that marked the halfway point was nowhere to be seen. The creek that runs here and in along the base of the ridge had either dried up or moved to a completely different location. I was trapped on Lone Pine Ridge with something that could mimic human voices, something that killed with surgical precision, something that could make trails disappear and compasses malfunction. As the sun started sinking toward the western ridges, I heard movement in the forest around me. Not the random sounds of animals going about their business, but deliberate, coordinated movement. Like something big was circling me, staying just out of sight. I found a defensible position against a large boulder and settled in to wait for nightfall, my rifle across my knees and my remaining flashlight close at hand. That's when I saw it for the first time. A shadow moving between the trees, too tall and angular to be human, too upright to be an animal. It was maybe 200 yards away, visible for just a few seconds before it melted back into the forest. But those few seconds were enough. 10 feet tall at least, moving on 2 legs but with a fluid, predatory grace that no human could match. And even at that distance, even in the failing light, I could see its eyes, golden, glowing, fixed directly on me. I raised my rifle and fired a warning shot into the air. The crack of the .30-06 echoed off the ridges and faded into silence. When the echo died, I heard that laughter again. Closer this time. Much closer. And now I knew I was going to die on this mountain, just like Tommy had 15 years ago. Darkness fell fast in the mountains, and with it came the true horror. The thing stopped hiding. I could hear it moving through the forest around my position, circling like a wolf, but making no effort to stay quiet. Branches snapped under its weight, and that sulfur stench got stronger every time it passed downwind of me. My flashlight beam caught glimpses of it between the trees. A shape definitely bipedal, but wrong in every way that mattered. The proportions were all off. Arms too long, torso too narrow, legs that bent in directions that made my eyes hurt to follow. But it was the sounds it made that nearly broke my mind. Not just Tommy's voice anymore, but others. My mother, who'd died 5 years ago, calling me home for dinner. My ex-wife, Sarah, apologizing for leaving me. My old partner, Rick, asking for help with a case we'd worked together 10 years back. Perfect imitations, every one of them. Voices I hadn't heard in years, saying things that tugged at every emotional wound I'd ever tried to heal. "Danny, sweetheart, why don't you come home?" My mother's voice coming from the darkness to my right. "I've got your favorite pot roast in the oven." "Don't listen to it," I whispered to myself, trying to focus on the rifle in my hands. "It's not real. None of it's real." But then I heard Sarah's voice and nearly broke down crying. "I'm sorry I left, Danny. I'm sorry I said those awful things. Come find me and we can talk about it. We can fix this." The voice was coming from directly behind me. I spun around, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, and for just a moment I saw Sarah standing at the edge of the trees. She looked exactly like she had the day she walked out on me. Same long brown hair, same green eyes, same sad smile that had always made me want to protect her from the whole world. But something was wrong with her reflection in my flashlight beam. The light seemed to pass right through her, casting strange shadows that didn't match her shape. "Sarah?" I whispered. She stepped forward, and that's when I saw the truth. It wasn't Sarah. It was the thing, somehow projecting her image like a movie on a screen. But the projection was imperfect. I could see the real creature's golden eyes burning in the darkness behind Sarah's familiar face. I fired 3 quick shots, center mass. The rifle reports crashed through the forest like thunder, and whatever illusion had been showing me Sarah's image shattered like glass. The creature let out a sound I'll never forget. Part roar, part scream, part laughter, like a mountain lion having its throat cut while it was still trying to purr. But my bullets hadn't hurt it. They'd passed right through whatever it was using to create the illusion, but the real creature was somewhere else entirely. "You can't kill me, Danny," it said, and now it was using its own voice for the first time, deep and resonant, like rocks grinding together in an avalanche. "I've been here since your people first walked these mountains. I was old when your Cherokee ancestors named me Kekle Kudle. I was ancient when your brother found me 15 years ago." The mention of Tommy hit me like a punch to the gut. "What did you do to him?" Laughter echoed from all directions. "The same thing I'm going to do to you. The same thing I did to those 3 hunters. I collected their hearts, Danny. Hearts full of fear taste the sweetest. You son of a bitch." I was past caring about strategy now, past worrying about conservation of ammunition. I fired again and again into the darkness, working the bolt as fast as I could, sending .30-06 rounds crashing through the forest. The creature kept laughing. When my rifle clicked empty, the laughter stopped. In the sudden silence, I could hear my own ragged breathing and the frantic hammering of my heart. "Are you finished?" the creature asked politely. "Because I have something to show you." A glow appeared in the forest about 50 yards away. Not warm electric light, but something cold and blue-green, like foxfire or swamp gas. As it got brighter, I could make out the mouth of another cave I hadn't noticed before. "Come see what I've collected, Danny. Come see what I've been saving." Every instinct told me not to move from my defensive position. But the creature was right. My rifle was empty, my radio was destroyed, and I was lost on a mountain with something that seemed immune to conventional weapons. I reloaded my rifle with my last clip and started walking toward the strange light. The cave was bigger than the first one, more like an underground chamber than a simple hole in the rock. The walls were covered with those same twisted symbols that hurt to look at, but now they were glowing with that same cold fire. In the center of the chamber, arranged in a perfect circle, were dozens of stone bowls. Each bowl contained a human heart. Some were fresh, still glistening with blood. Others were older, dried and shriveled like jerky. But at the center of the circle, in a bowl made from what looked like polished human bone, was a heart that I recognized. It was still beating. "Tommy?" I whispered. "Hello, little brother." The voice came from the heart itself, though Tommy's lips had been silent for 15 years. "I've been waiting for you, waiting and watching and hoping you'd come back to these mountains." "This isn't real," I said, but my voice sounded hollow and unconvincing even to me. "Real enough," the creature said, and now I could see it clearly in the glow from the symbols. 10 feet tall, covered in coarse black hair that looked more like wire than fur. Its face was almost human but stretched vertically, with a mouth full of teeth like broken glass and those burning golden eyes. Its arms reached almost to the ground, ending in hands tipped with claws longer than butcher knives. "Your brother's heart beats in my collection, but his spirit remains trapped here, just like yours will be, once I add your heart to the circle." It took a step toward me, and I could smell the death and decay that clung to it like a second skin. "But first, I want you to understand what you're dealing with. I am the last of my kind, Danny. The Cherokee knew how to fight us once, but that knowledge died with the old shamans. Your people came to these mountains and forgot the warnings, forgot the protections." Another step closer. "I feed on human hearts, yes, but not just the muscle and blood, the emotions. The fear and love and hope that your kind carries inside you. Hearts full of terror are sweet, but hearts full of love are even sweeter." I thought about Sarah, about Tommy, about all the people I'd cared about over the years. "You bastard." "Yes," it agreed. "I am exactly that." The creature lunged, moving faster than anything that size should have been able to move. Its claws caught me across the chest, shredding my jacket and the shirt underneath, drawing 4 parallel lines of fire across my ribs. I stumbled backward, trying to bring my rifle to bear, but the creature was already on me. One massive hand closed around my throat, lifting me off the ground like I weighed nothing at all. "Your brother put up more of a fight," it said conversationally, its golden eyes only inches from mine. "But then he had something to live for, a wife, children on the way. What do you have, Danny?" The claws at my throat tightened, and I could feel my vision starting to narrow. In desperation, I grabbed for the flare gun clipped to my belt, the one piece of equipment I'd forgotten about in my panic. I managed to fire it point blank into the creature's face. The flare exploded in a burst of brilliant white light, and the creature screamed like a steam engine exploding. It dropped me and staggered backward, clawing at its eyes. "Light!" I gasped, understanding flooding through me. "It's vulnerable to light." I fired my second flare at the stone bowls in the center of the chamber. The magnesium burn was so bright it turned the cave into a vision of hell, dancing shadows and brilliant white fire, and the creature writhing in what was obviously agony. The hearts in the stone bowls began to smoke and shrivel, and I could hear voices crying out as whatever power had been keeping them preserved finally failed. "Goodbye, Danny," Tommy's voice whispered, fading like an echo. "I'm sorry I couldn't protect you." The creature turned toward me, its face a ruin of burned flesh and fury. "You think this will stop me?" I've survived for centuries." But its voice was weaker now, and I could see that the brilliant flare light had done real damage. Its golden eyes were dim, and it moved with the unsteady gait of something badly injured. I still had one flare left, and a crazy idea. "Cherokee knew how to fight you," I said, backing toward the cave entrance. "Maybe it's time I learned their lessons." I fired my last flare at the cave ceiling, where mineral deposits had created natural formations that looked almost like crystal. The magnesium burn reflected and refracted off the stone, turning the entire chamber into a blazing furnace of light. The creature's scream shattered the silence of the mountain, and I ran for my life. I made it maybe half a mile before I collapsed, my chest burning from the claw marks and my lungs raw from breathing smoke and sulfur. The sky was starting to lighten in the east. Somehow I'd survived the night. Behind me I could hear the creature crashing through the forest, but it was moving slowly now, clumsily. The light had hurt it bad, maybe even given me a chance to escape. That's when I remembered Tommy's old emergency route. 15 years ago, my brother had shown me a way down the mountain that avoided the main trails, an abandoned mine shaft that connected to a series of natural caves, eventually opening onto the road about 3 miles from the ranger station. Tommy had discovered it during his first year as a ranger, and we'd used it as a shortcut a few times when we were both working these mountains. If I could find the entrance, I might be able to get off Lone Pine Ridge alive. The mine shaft was hidden behind a curtain of dead vines and fallen trees, exactly where Tommy had shown me years before. It was narrow and dark, barely wide enough for a grown man to squeeze through, but it led down through the mountain's heart toward safety. I crawled through that tunnel for what felt like hours, my flashlight growing dimmer with every foot of progress. Behind me, I could hear the creature trying to follow, but it was too big to fit through the narrow passage. Its roars of frustration followed me through the darkness, growing fainter as I put distance between us. The tunnel finally opened onto a hillside about a quarter mile from Highway 25. I emerged into full daylight, bleeding and exhausted, but alive. The first car I flagged down was a Kentucky State Police cruiser, and the trooper took one look at me and radioed for an ambulance. At the hospital, I told them I'd been attacked by a bear. The claw marks across my chest were consistent with that story, and nobody wanted to hear about monsters and missing hearts and voices that shouldn't exist. The official report blamed the 3 hunters' deaths on an unusually aggressive black bear. The Forest Service closed the Lone Pine Ridge area indefinitely, citing unstable geological conditions and dangerous wildlife activity. Joe Hensley visited me while I was recovering. He sat beside my hospital bed and listened to my bear attack story without saying much. But when I was finished, he leaned forward and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "Danny, there's something you need to know about your brother." He handed me a manila envelope. "We found this in Tommy's locker after he died. Never knew what to make of it, so we kept it sealed. Figured it was just personal effects." Inside the envelope was Tommy's journal, and the final entry made my hands shake. October 15th, 1956. Found the cave today, the one the old Cherokee warned about. Grandmother Stands Tall was right. There are things in these mountains that shouldn't exist. The Kekle is real. I've seen its collection, seen what it does to people. But I also found something else. The Cherokee had ways to fight it. Bright light hurts it, disorients it. Fire made from certain woods can drive it away. And there's a ritual, a way to bind it to a specific area to keep it from ranging too far. If something happens to me, if I don't make it back, maybe Danny will find this someday. Maybe he'll be able to finish what I started. The creature is weak during daylight, nearly powerless. It needs the darkness to hunt, needs the shadows to hide in. But even in daylight, it's dangerous if cornered. There's more to learn, more preparations to make. But I'm running out of time. The hunting season is bringing too many people into its territory, and it's getting bolder. If I don't survive this, I hope someone who understands will find these notes and do what needs to be done. The journal shook in my hands. Tommy had known. He'd been trying to stop the creature when it killed him. I spent 3 weeks in the hospital and another month in physical therapy getting full use of my arms back. But the real healing took much longer. The nightmares, the sudden panics in dark places, the way I'd jump at every shadow. That took years to manage. I transferred to a desk job at the regional office, telling everyone I was ready to slow down after 19 years in the field. The truth was, I couldn't handle being alone in the deep woods anymore. Couldn't trust my own senses when darkness fell. But I also couldn't forget what I'd learned up on Lone Pine Ridge. Over the next few years, I started researching Cherokee folklore, studying everything I could find about creatures like the Kekla. I learned about binding rituals and protective ceremonies, about the kinds of weapons and tools that could actually hurt something like the creature I'd faced. And I kept track of the disappearances, because they didn't stop. Oh, the Lone Pine Ridge area stayed quiet. Too much official attention, too many people watching. But other sections of Daniel Boone National Forest started reporting missing hikers. Similar circumstances, similar aftermath. Bodies found with surgical precision, hearts and organs removed. The creature had moved, but it was still hunting. Every few months I'd drive out to the closed sections of Pine Mountain and leave warnings posted along the unofficial trails. Nothing official. Just handmade signs warning hunters and hikers to avoid certain areas, especially during the hours between sunset and dawn. Some people probably thought I'd gone crazy after my bear attack. Maybe they were right. But those signs saved lives. I'm sure of it. In 1985, 14 years after my encounter, I finally retired from the Forest Service. By then, I'd documented 17 disappearances that matched the creature's pattern, scattered across 3 different national forests in Kentucky and Tennessee. I'd also learned something important from Tommy's journal and my own research. The creature wasn't invincible. It could be hurt, maybe even killed, with the right knowledge and preparation. But I was getting too old for that kind of fight. On my last day as a ranger, I drove back to Pine Mountain one final time. Not to Lone Pine Ridge. That area was still officially closed and would probably stay that way forever. But to an overlook about 5 miles south where you could see the ridge clearly through binoculars. The sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of gold and purple. Beautiful country, the kind of landscape that made you understand why people fell in love with Kentucky. As darkness fell, I heard it again. Faint but unmistakable, carried on the evening wind. A woman screaming. The Cumberland screamer was still out there, still hunting, still collecting hearts in its stone bowls, still imitating voices to lure victims into the darkness. I thought about Tommy, about those 3 bow hunters, about all the people who'd disappeared over the years. I thought about the Cherokee shamans who'd once known how to fight creatures like this, and how their knowledge had died with them, and I made a decision. The next morning, I started writing everything down. Every detail I could remember about my encounter, every piece of folklore I'd researched, every clue Tommy had left in his journal. I compiled it all into a comprehensive report, not for the Forest Service, but for whoever might come after me. Someone young enough and brave enough to finish what Tommy had started. I sent copies to universities, to Cherokee cultural centers, to anyone I thought might take the threat seriously. Most of them probably thought I was a crazy old man telling tall tales. But maybe 1 or 2 believed. Maybe somewhere out there, someone is reading this account and understanding what it means. Someone who knows that there are still monsters in the deep places of the world, still things that hunt in the darkness between the trees. The Cherokee called it Kekla, the beast that walks like a man. But the mountain folk had a simpler name for it, the Cumberland Screamer. And it's still out there, waiting in the shadows of Pine Mountain, calling to lost travelers with voices of the dead. I'm 73 years old now, too old and too tired to hunt monsters. But sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind is blowing down from the mountains, I can still hear that awful laughter echoing through the hollows. And I know that somewhere in those dark caves, new hearts are being added to the collection. If you're reading this, if you're planning to hike or hunt in the remote areas of Daniel Boone National Forest, remember what I've told you. Stay on the marked trails. Travel in groups. Carry bright lights and extra batteries. And if you hear voices calling your name from the darkness, voices that sound like people you know and love, don't listen, don't answer. And whatever you do, don't follow them into the caves. Because some things that die in these mountains don't stay dead, and some hungers can never be satisfied, no matter how many hearts get collected in stone bowls deep beneath the earth. The Cumberland Screamer is still screaming, still hunting, still waiting, and the mountains keep their secrets. My name is Bill Ironclad, and I've been a park ranger for 24 years. Before that, I spent 15 years with the Pennsylvania State Police. I've seen car crashes that would make you sick, found missing hikers who'd been dead for weeks, and dealt with every kind of crazy person you can think of. I thought I'd seen everything. I was wrong. The Allegheny National Forest is a big place. More than 500,000 acres of trees, streams, and wildlife. Most people come for the fishing at Kinsua Dam or to camp in the summer. But in March of 1992, when the ice was starting to break up and the weather couldn't make up its mind, we didn't get many visitors. That's when things got weird. I remember the morning it all started. The snow was melting, making everything muddy and slippery. I was drinking coffee at the ranger station when old Pete Kowalski came in. Pete had been fishing these waters for 40 years. He knew every rock and tree around the reservoir. "Bill," he said, taking off his wet cap, "I need to tell you something, and you're going to think I'm crazy." "Try me," I said. Pete wasn't the type to make things up. "Yesterday I was fishing near the dam. The sun was behind clouds, you know, kind of gray and dim. I was watching my line when I saw something moving on the water." "Fish jumping?" "No." Pete shook his head. "It was a shadow, but there was nothing making it. No bird, no plane, nothing. Just this dark shape moving across the water like it was alive." I set down my coffee. "Pete, shadows don't move by themselves." That's what I thought too. But this one did. And when I looked at my own shadow on the ground, it was pointing the wrong way. The sun was behind me, but my shadow was in front of me. Pete left after that, but his story stuck with me. In my police days, I'd learned to listen when reliable people told me strange things, even when those things didn't. To make sense. 2 days later, I got another report. This time from Sarah Chen, who worked at the visitor center. She'd been walking to her car after closing when she noticed something odd. All the shadows around the parking lot were moving, she told me. But there was no wind, and nothing else was moving, just the shadows, like they were trying to get somewhere. I started keeping a notebook. Within a week, I had 5 more reports. A family camping near the reservoir said their shadows had gotten longer during the day instead of shorter. A maintenance worker found shadow shapes on the ground that didn't match any of the trees above them. A fisherman swore he saw his shadow wave at him. I didn't believe in ghosts or monsters. 24 years in law enforcement teaches you that there's usually a normal reason for strange things. But these reports were piling up, and they all had one thing in common: shadows acting wrong. The temperature was another thing that bothered me. Every spot where people reported weird shadows was cold. Not just cool, but actually cold enough to see your breath. This was happening even when it was 50 degrees in the shade everywhere else. I decided to investigate properly. I took my camera and drove out to the area near the dam where most of the sightings had happened. The day was overcast, with thick clouds making everything look gray and flat. Perfect weather for shadows to act up, according to the witnesses. I parked near the boat launch and started walking along the shoreline. The ice on the reservoir was breaking up, making cracking sounds that echoed through the forest. It was the kind of place that could feel spooky, even on a normal day. That's when I saw my first one. I was taking pictures of the area when I noticed something in my viewfinder. There was a shadow on the ground about 20 feet away. It looked like the shadow of a person standing up, arms at their sides, but there was nobody there to cast it. I lowered the camera and looked directly at the spot. The shadow was still there, dark and clear against the muddy ground. I looked up at the sky, trying to figure out what could be blocking the light. Nothing but gray clouds. I raised my camera again and took a picture. Then I walked over to where the shadow was. When I got close, the air got cold fast. Cold enough that I could see my breath. And the shadow, it moved. Just a little, like someone had shifted their weight from one foot to the other. My hands started shaking, but not from the cold. I took more pictures and got out of there quick. When I had the film developed the next day, every single photo was completely black. Not blurry, not dark. Completely black, like I'd never taken the lens cap off. That night, I sat in my kitchen going through my notes. 7 reports of strange shadows in 10 days, all in the same general area, all involving shadows that didn't behave like shadows should. I poured myself a drink and tried to think of logical explanations. Maybe it was some kind of weather thing, or light reflecting off the water in a weird way. Or maybe people were just spooked because it was that time of year when everything looks dead and gray. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. I'd seen that shadow move. I'd felt that unnatural cold. And I had a feeling this was just the beginning. I was right about that part, at least. The first body showed up 3 days later. Eddie Martinez had been fishing alone near the north end of the reservoir. His wife called when he didn't come home for dinner. I found his truck at the boat launch, keys still in the ignition. His tackle box was open on the ground, fishing line tangled everywhere like he'd dropped everything and run. I followed his footprints along the muddy shore. The tracks were normal at first, steady walking pace, stopping here and there where he'd probably cast his line. But about 100 yards from the truck, something changed. The footprints got deep and like Eddie had started running. Then they got weird. Instead of pointing toward the water like you'd expect from a fisherman, they were all over the place. Some pointing toward the forest, some back toward the truck, some in complete circles, like Eddie had been running around in panic, not knowing which way to go. I found him another 50 yards down the shore. Eddie Martinez was 62 years old when he went fishing that morning. The body I found looked like he was 90. His hair had gone completely white. His skin was wrinkled and spotted like old leather. His hands were thin and bent like an old man's, but his driver's license said he was born in 1930, which made him 62. The weird part? There wasn't a mark on him. No cuts, no bruises, no sign of a heart attack or stroke. He just looked like he'd aged 30 years in one afternoon. The county coroner, Dr. Walsh, had never seen anything like it. The autopsy showed that Eddie's body had physically aged decades in a matter of hours. His organs, his bones, even his teeth. Everything was consistent with a man in his 90s who died of old age. It's impossible, Dr. Walsh told me. People don't age like this, not even with the worst diseases. But Eddie had. And when I went back to examine the scene more carefully, I found something that made my blood run cold. All around where Eddie's body had been lying, there were no shadows, not just dim light, complete absence of shadow. Even though it was an overcast day and everything else in the forest was casting normal shadows, the area around Eddie was completely shadowless, like something had sucked up every bit of darkness from that spot. I took more pictures. These ones came out normal, which was almost worse than the black film from before, because now I had proof of what I was seeing. That night, I called my old partner from the state police, Mike Cheech, and Sarah's uncle. Mike had seen his share of strange cases over the years. "Let me get this straight," he said over the phone. "You've got shadows moving around by themselves, and now a guy who aged 30 years in one day? That's about the size of it. Bill, you need to consider that maybe you've been in the woods too long. Stress can make people see things. I've got witnesses, Mike. Good people. And I've got photos." There was a long pause. "Send me what you have. I'll take a look." The next morning brought another report. This one from Tom Bradley, a maintenance worker who'd been checking the dam equipment. Tom was a steady guy, worked for the Park Service for 8 years. Not the type to imagine things. "I was walking along the spillway," Tom told me. "Normal routine check, you know. The sun came out from behind the clouds for just a minute, and I saw my shadow on the concrete. But then I noticed something else. There was another shadow right next to mine. Another person's shadow. That's what I thought. So I turned around to see who was behind me. Nobody there. But when I looked back at the concrete, both shadows were still there. Mine and this other one." Tom's hands were shaking as he told me this. The other shadow was moving, Bill, like it was trying to get my attention. It kept pointing toward the forest. "What did you do?" I got the hell out of there. But as I was leaving, I looked back. My shadow was still on the concrete, but I was already 50 feet away. That afternoon, Tom Bradley was found dead in his apartment. Same as Eddie, aged decades in hours. No sign of violence or disease. His landlord said Tom had looked fine when he'd seen him that morning, but the body the paramedics carried out looked like a 90-year-old man. I was starting to see a pattern. People encountered the strange shadows, and then they died of rapid aging. But it wasn't random. These things were hunting. I decided to test a theory. I went back to the spillway where Tom had seen his shadow detach. The concrete was stained with something dark, like, Gil. But when I touched it, my finger came away clean. The stain was there, but it wasn't really there. I took out my camera and started photographing the stain. Through the viewfinder, I could see something else. The dark stain was moving, spreading across the concrete like spilled water. But when I looked directly at it, the stain was still. I took the picture and immediately felt the temperature drop. My breath came out in clouds, and the hair on my arms stood up. Something was watching me. I could feel it. That's when I saw my own shadow. I was standing in the middle of the spillway, with the sun directly overhead. My shadow should have been a small, dark spot right at my feet. Instead, it stretched out 10 feet in front of me, dark and clear. And it was facing the wrong direction. While I watched, my shadow raised its arm and pointed toward the forest. I wasn't moving my arm. My arm was at my side, holding the camera. But my shadow was pointing. I ran. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I ran back to my truck and didn't stop until I was miles away from the dam. That night, I developed the film from the spillway. The photos showed something that made me pour myself a double whiskey and sit in my kitchen until dawn. In the pictures, there were dozens of shadows on the concrete, human-shaped shadows, all pointing toward the forest. But in every photo, I was the only person there. Mike Chen called me the next morning. "Bill, I looked at those photos you sent. Either you're the best special effects artist in Pennsylvania, or you've got a real problem." "It's not special effects, Mike." "Then you need to call someone higher up the chain. This is beyond local park service." But I knew nobody would believe it. 2 dead men, aged to death by shadows. It sounded crazy even to me, and I was living it. I was on my own. And whatever these things were, they were just getting started. By the end of the week, I had 3 more bodies and a pattern that scared me more than anything I'd seen in 39 years of law enforcement. The 3rd victim was Jenny Walsh, Dr. Walsh's niece, visiting from Pittsburgh. She'd been hiking alone on the trail near Rimrock Overlook. Her uncle found her when she didn't return to their cabin by dark, same as the others. Aged decades in hours, no wounds, no sign of struggle. The 4th was Marcus Thompson, a photographer who'd come to take pictures of the spring ice breakup. He'd been found at his campsite, camera still in his hands. The last photos on his roll showed shadows moving across the ground in broad daylight. In the final picture, you could see his own shadow reaching toward the camera like it was trying to grab the lens. The 5th was Rebecca Santos, a park volunteer who'd been cleaning up litter near the boat launch. Her husband said she'd called him around noon, excited because she'd seen something amazing. Shadows dancing in the woods like they were alive. She never made it home. 5 people dead in 10 days. All found aged beyond their years. All in areas where people had reported strange shadow activity. The county was starting to panic. Reporters were calling. Park headquarters wanted answers I couldn't give them. But I was learning things about these shadow creatures, studying them like I'd studied crime scenes for decades. They were stronger during overcast days. When the light was gray and diffused, they could move more freely. Direct sunlight seemed to weaken them, but it didn't stop them completely. They needed existing shadows to travel through. They couldn't create their own darkness. And they were smart. Each attack was more coordinated than the last. They were learning from their kills, getting better at hunting. I started carrying a high-powered flashlight everywhere I went. I also bought battery-powered lanterns and kept them in my truck. If these things lived in shadows, maybe enough light would keep them away. I was wrong about that, too. On Thursday morning, I got a seer. All that changed everything. A family of 4 had been camping at Hart's Content, a remote area about 15 miles from the dam. The father, David Kim, had called on his satellite phone. He was whispering, scared. "Something's wrong with our shadows," he said. "They're not connected to us anymore." I drove out there fast as I could, flashlights and lanterns loaded in my truck. Heart's Content was deep in the forest, surrounded by old-growth trees that blocked out most of the sky. Even on sunny days, it was dim and shadowy. I found the Kim family huddled in their tent, too scared to come out. David Kim was a software engineer from Philadelphia. His wife, Linda, was a nurse, and their 2 kids were 8 and 10 years old. Not the type of people to imagine things. "Show me," I said. David pointed at the ground outside their tent. Their 4 shadows were there, 2 adults, 2 children. But the family was inside the tent. The shadows were standing around their camp table like they were having breakfast. I set up my lanterns in a circle around the campsite, making it bright as day. The shadows didn't disappear. They got darker, more solid, and they started moving toward the tent where the family was hiding. "Everyone in my truck," I said. "Now." We loaded up and drove away from Heart's Content fast. In my rearview mirror, I could see the shadows still standing around their campsite, watching us leave. The Kim family left Pennsylvania that day. Smart move. That night, I sat in my office going through every report, every photo, every piece of evidence I'd collected. I was missing something important, and people were dying because of it. Then I found it. In the historical files for the park. In 1918, during the influenza pandemic, there had been reports of shadow sickness in the same area. 23 people died in 3 weeks, all found aged beyond their years, all in R, as where witnesses reported shadows moving independently of light sources. The attacks had stopped suddenly in April 1918, when a forest fire burned through the area around what was now the dam site. After the fire, no more shadow sickness. No more reports of strange shadows. Until now. I kept reading. The 1918 reports described the shadows as parasites from the shadow world that fed on human life force. According to the old testimonies, they could only exist by attaching themselves to human shadows, draining the life from their victims to maintain their presence in our world. The historical record also mentioned something else. The shadows grew stronger during times of death and suffering. The 1918 outbreak had happened during the worst pandemic in human history. Millions were dying worldwide. The shadow creatures had fed on all that death and grown powerful enough to cross over into our world. I thought about the recent deaths in the park. 5 people had died, and each death seemed to make the shadows stronger, bolder. They were feeding on the deaths they caused, growing more powerful with each kill. There was something else in the old reports that made my blood freeze. According to the 1918 witnesses, the shadow creatures could possess human shadows completely. When that happened, the person would fall into a coma while their shadow joined the shadow army, hunting other humans. I thought about Marcus Thompson's camera showing his own shadow reaching toward the lens. About Tom Bradley's shadow staying on the concrete after Tom had walked away. About the Kim family's shadows having breakfast while the family hid in their tent. These things weren't just killing people. They were stealing their shadows, turning them into hunters. I was dealing with an invasion. That night, I made a decision that probably saved my life. Instead of going home to my dark house in the woods, I drove to the 24-hour diner in Kane. I sat under the bright fluorescent lights until sunrise, drinking coffee and planning my next move. Because I was pretty sure the shadows had not iced me, and I was pretty sure they were coming for me next. They came for me 2 nights later. I'd been staying at the diner or the 24-hour gas station, anywhere with bright lights and other people around. But I had to sleep sometime, and I couldn't stay awake forever. I'd set up a camp in the old ranger station at Morrison Trail, the one we didn't use anymore because it was too remote. I figured if I had to face these things, I wanted to do it somewhere isolated where innocent people wouldn't get hurt. I'd brought every light I could find: spotlights, work lamps, flashlights, lanterns. I ran extension cords from the generator until the whole station was lit up like a baseball stadium. If light could keep the shadows away, this would be the safest place in the forest. I was wrong again. The attack started just after midnight. I was sitting at the old desk, cleaning my service weapon and trying to stay alert. The lights started flickering. Not electrical problems. I could tell the difference. Something was interfering with them. Then I noticed my shadow on the wall behind me. Even with all the lights creating multiple shadows, there was one that was darker than the rest, and it was moving wrong. I was sitting still, but my shadow was standing up. I turned around slowly. Nothing there but the bright lights and the empty wall. But when I looked back, my shadow was walking toward the door. I stood up fast, and that's when things got really bad. My shadow didn't stand up with me. It stayed on the wall, a dark shape that moved independently, and it wasn't alone. Shadows were pouring through the windows, under the door, through every crack and gap in the building. Human-shaped shadows, dozens of them. I recognized some of them. Eddie Martinez's thin frame, Marcus Thompson's photographer's posture, Rebecca Santos's small silhouette. They were the shadows of the people who had died, and they were hunting me. I grabbed my biggest spotlight and pointed it at the wall where my shadow was standing. The beam went right through it. The shadow got darker. "You can't have me," I said out loud. Probably stupid to talk to shadow creatures, but I was scared and angry and running out of options. My shadow turned toward me. Even though it was just a dark shape on the wall, I could feel it looking at me. Then it stepped off the wall. I've seen a lot of impossible things in my life, but watching your own shadow walk around the room as a three-dimensional being is something that breaks your brain. It was me, but made of darkness. Same height, same build, even the same clothes, but completely black, like a person-shaped hole in reality. The shadow me walked toward me with my own gait, my own mannerisms. When it got close, I could feel the cold radiating off it. Not just cool air, cold that went into your bones and made your teeth ache. I backed away, keeping the spotlight between us. The shadow me stopped and tilted its head, exactly the way I do when I'm thinking. Then it smiled. I couldn't see the smile, but I felt it. That's when I realized what was happening. The shadow creatures weren't just stealing people's shadows. They were becoming them, learning from them. My shadow had been attached to me my whole life, watching everything I did, learning how I moved and thought and reacted. Now it was using that knowledge against me. The shadow me lunged forward. I swung the spotlight like a club, but it passed right through. The shadow grabbed my wrist with its dark hand, and pain shot up my arm like I'd grabbed a live wire. Where it touched me, my skin went numb and cold. I could feel my life draining away, just like it had drained from Eddie and Marcus and the others. I was aging, getting weaker, my hair starting to gray. But I'd learned something from studying the crime scenes. The shadow creatures needed contact to drain life force, physical contact with their victims' shadows. I jerked my arm away and ran for the generator. If I couldn't but fight them with light, maybe I could fight them with darkness. I yanked the main power cord out of the generator. Every light in the station went out at once, plunging us into complete blackness. The shadow creatures stopped moving. In total darkness, they had nothing to anchor themselves to. No light source meant no shadows. They were cut off from their power source. I fumbled for my flashlight and clicked it on. The beam showed the room full of shadow creatures, but they were flickering now, losing their solid form. My own shadow was back where it belonged, attached to my feet like a normal shadow should be. But I knew this was just temporary. As soon as dawn came, they'd be back. I spent the rest of the night planning. By sunrise, I knew what I had to do. The shadow creatures were feeding on death and growing stronger. They could possess human shadows and turn them into hunters. They could drain life force through physical contact. But they had weaknesses too. They needed existing shadows to travel and maintain their form. They were stronger in diffused light and weaker in direct sunlight or complete darkness. And most importantly, they seemed to have a home base, some central location where they gathered their power. I thought about the 1918 outbreak and how it had ended with a forest fire. The fire had destroyed their anchor point, sent them back to wherever they came from. I needed to find where they were coming from and destroy it. Looking at the old maps and geological surveys, I found what I was looking for. About a mile from the dam site, there was a cave system that wasn't on any of the tourist maps. According to the surveys, it went deep underground, with passages that connected to old mine shafts from the 1800s. If the shadow creatures needed a dark place to gather their power, that cave system would be perfect. I loaded my truck with everything I could find that produced light or fire, spotlights, flares, gasoline, even fireworks left over from the 4th of July. If I was going into their home territory, I was going in prepared. The sun was setting when I reached the cave entrance. It was hidden behind a rock fall, almost impossible to find unless you knew where to look. The opening was just big enough for a person to squeeze through. I could feel them in there. The cold was seeping out of the cave like breath from a freezer, and I could hear something that might have been whispering, or might have been wind through rock passages. I strapped on a headlamp, grabbed my biggest spotlight, and squeezed through the opening. The cave was full of shadows that moved independently of my light. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, all human-shaped, all turning toward me as I entered their domain. At the far end of the main chamber, I found what I was looking for. The shadows were pouring out of a crack in the rock wall, streaming into our world like smoke from a chimney. The crack glowed with a dim, wrong kind of light. Not quite darkness, not quite illumination. That was their doorway, their way into our world. I set up my spotlights around the chamber and lit the emergency flares. The shadows screamed. Not a sound you hear with your ears, but something that goes straight into your brain and makes you want to run. Then I poured gasoline around the base of the rock wall and lit it. The explosion knocked me down and probably saved my life. When I woke up, the cave entrance had collapsed, sealing the doorway between worlds. The shadows were gone. That was 6 months ago. The shadow attacks stopped after I collapsed the cave. The official report blamed the deaths on carbon monoxide poisoning from faulty camping equipment, a story I helped create because the truth wouldn't have done anyone any good. Dr. Walsh agreed to falsify the autopsy reports. Mike Chen helped with the paperwork. The families of the victims got closure, even if it wasn't the whole truth. The park reopened, and life went back to normal. Mostly. And I still carry a flashlight everywhere I go. I've had floodlights installed around my house, and I keep a generator running all night. I sleep with a lamp on and wake up every few hours to check that my shadow is still attached to my feet. The explosion damaged my eyes from all the bright light I was exposed to. I have to wear dark glasses now, even indoors. The doctors say it's permanent, but I don't mind. It's a small price to pay for being alive. Sometimes I wonder if I really sealed that doorway or just made it harder for them to get through. On overcast days, when the light is gray and diffused, I still feel like something is watching me. I still check my shadow more often than I should. The Allegheny National Forest is beautiful this time of year. Families come to camp and fish and hike the trails. Kids run around in the sunshine, laughing and playing games. Their shadows dance along behind them, attached and normal and harmless. But I know what's really out there in the dark places of the world. I know that shadows can detach and hunt and kill. I know that there are doorways between worlds, and sometimes things come through that shouldn't. I'm still a park ranger, still protecting people, even if they don't know what I'm protecting them from. I patrol the areas where the attacks happened, watching for signs that the shadows might be coming back. So far, so good. The cave entrance is sealed, but I check on it every few weeks. The rockfall is still solid, no sign of disturbance. Whatever was behind that doorway is still trapped on the other side. I hope. Last week, a hiker reported seeing his shadow move independently near Rimrock Overlook. I investigated and found nothing unusual, but I've increased my patrols in that area just to be safe. Because the thing about shadows is, they're always with us. Every person, every tree, every building casts a shadow when the light hits it right. And now that I know what shadows can become, I see potential danger everywhere. But I also see families enjoying the forest, kids learning about nature, couples finding peace in the wilderness. The Allegheny National Forest is still a beautiful, magical place. It's just a little more dangerous than most people realize. I can live with that. I can live with checking my shadow and sleeping with the lights on and carrying more flashlights than any one person should need. Because I know that somewhere out there, in the dark spaces between worlds, the shadow creatures are still waiting, still hungry, still looking for a way back into our world. And when they find it, not if, but when, I'll be ready for them. My name is Bill Ironclad, and I've been fighting shadows for 6 months now. It's not the job I signed up for, but it's the job I've got. And I'm good at it. My name is Michael Redwood, but everyone calls me Mike. I've been a park ranger for 11 years now, and before that I spent 6 years in college learning about animals and forests. People always ask me if I believe in monsters. Used to be, I'd laugh and tell them about the beast of Bladenboro. Just sick coyotes with rabies, nothing more. That was before the summer of 1974. That was before I learned some things are real, whether you believe in them or not. I grew up in these Georgia mountains. My daddy taught me to track deer before I could tie my shoes. By the time I was 12, I could tell you what animal made which footprint, what it ate last, and where it was heading. When I got my job at Chattahoochee National Forest, folks said I knew these woods better than anyone alive. The Cohutta Wilderness is rough country, deep valleys cut between sharp ridges, and the trees grow so thick you can't see the sky in some places. Tourists get lost in there every summer. Sometimes we find them, sometimes we don't. July 1974 was the hottest, driest summer anyone could remember. The creeks were down to trickles, and animals had to travel miles just to find water. That's when predators get bold. That's when they come looking for easy meals. But this wasn't about easy meals. This was something else entirely. The first call came on a Tuesday morning. Jimmy Henderson owned a cattle ranch right up against the forest boundary. He called the ranger station, voice shaking like a leaf. "Mike, you need to get out here. Something killed 3 of my steers last night." Cattle die all the time. Disease, accidents, old age. But when I got to Jimmy's place, I knew this was different. 3 full-grown steers lay in the pasture, and they looked like deflated balloons. Their skin hung loose and wrinkled. Every drop of blood was gone. "You ever see anything like this?" Jimmy asked. I knelt beside the nearest steer. 2 small holes punctured the neck, neat as surgery. No torn flesh, no bite marks, no sign of struggle. "Vampire bats?" Jimmy suggested. "Wrong part of the world," I said. "And bats can't drain a 1,200-pound steer." I took photos and measurements. The holes were perfectly round, about the size of drinking straws. Whatever made them had been precise, professional. That night, Jimmy lost 2 more cattle. Same thing, drained dry with tiny holes in their necks. He called me before sunrise. "This ain't natural, Mike. My dogs won't even go near the pasture now. They just whine and hide under the porch." Animals know things we don't. When dogs and cats start acting strange, smart people pay attention. By Friday, 3 more ranchers had called. Same story everywhere. Cattle found bone dry, small puncture wounds, no other damage. The animals hadn't been eaten or torn apart. Something was drinking them like juice boxes. I set up my first camera that weekend. Motion-activated, infrared, the best equipment the Forest Service had. I placed it where the attacks were happening most. If something was out there, I'd get its picture. Monday morning, I checked the camera. The film was ruined, melted, like someone had held a blowtorch to it. But the camera housing wasn't damaged. Whatever did it had been very hot, very close. That's when Mrs. Patterson called about her dog. "Rex never left the yard," she sobbed into the phone. "He was scared of his own shadow. Now he's... I found Rex behind Mrs. Patterson's garden shed. A golden retriever that had weighed 60 pounds was now a furry bag of bones. Same puncture wounds, same complete drainage. "What kind of animal does this, Mike?" Mrs. Patterson asked. I didn't have an answer. In 11 years as a ranger, I'd never seen anything like it. But I was going to find out. That night, I loaded my truck with Eve, every piece of equipment I owned: night vision goggles, tracking gear, cameras, emergency radio. Whatever was out there, it was getting bolder. And I had a feeling it wasn't done with livestock. And pets. I was right about that. I just had no idea how wrong I was about everything else. The Kowalski family disappeared on a Wednesday. They'd been camping at Devil's Backbone Campground for 3 days. Tom Kowalski, his wife Sarah, and their 10-year-old daughter Amy. Experienced campers who knew the rules. Hang your food. Keep a clean campsite. Respect the wilderness. When they didn't check out Thursday morning, I drove up to their site. Their tent stood perfectly intact. Sleeping bags laid out neat as you please. Coffee pot still had grounds in it from Tuesday night. But the family was gone. I called their names, checked the nearby trails, found their car keys on the picnic table, truck still parked in its spot. Nobody just vanishes without a trace. Then I found the blood. Small drops led away from the campsite into the woods. Not much, maybe a few tablespoons total. But it made a clear trail heading up the ridge toward the old Cherokee burial ground. I followed that trail for 2 miles. The blood drops got bigger as I climbed. Something had been bleeding more and more. Then the trail just stopped at a rocky clearing near the ridge top. That's where I found them. All 3 bodies lay in a perfect circle, arms and legs spread like they were making snow angels. Tom, Sarah, little Amy. Their faces were white as paper. Their necks each had 2 small holes. But their expressions, that's what I'll never forget. Pure terror frozen on every face. Not the kind of fear you see in accident victims. This was the look of people who had seen something impossible. I radioed for help, but my radio just gave back static. Tried again. Nothing but white noise. The radio had worked fine at the bottom of the hill. I ran back down the trail to my truck. The radio worked perfectly there. Dispatch sent the coroner, the sheriff, and a team of investigators. By the time we got back up the ridge, the bodies were gone. They were right here, I insisted. 3 people, drained of blood, same as the cattle. We searched until dark, found some scuff marks in the dirt. A few spots that might have been blood if you looked real hard. But no bodies. No evidence a family had ever been there. Heat getting to you, Mike? Sheriff Dalton suggested. These dry spells can play tricks on a man's mind. But I knew what I'd seen, and I knew something was watching us from the tree line while we searched. I could feel eyes on me, cold and patient. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about little Amy Kowalski's face, about those perfect puncture wounds, about the way all the electronics malfunctioned on the ridge. Around 3 a.m. I heard something howling in the distance. Not a wolf. Georgia hasn't had wolves for decades. Not a coyote either. This was deeper, more intelligent, like something trying to sound like an animal but not quite getting it right. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped onto the porch. The howling came again, closer this time, from the direction of Devil's Backbone Campground. I should have stayed inside, should have locked the door and waited for morning. Instead, I got in my truck and drove toward the sound. The campground was empty. They'd closed it after the Kowalski incident. I parked and walked to their old campsite, flashlight beam dancing ahead of me. The tent was gone now. Picnic table overturned. But something had been there recently. The ground was torn up like a giant dog had been digging. That's when I saw the tracks. Paw prints in the soft dirt, but wrong somehow. Too big for any dog, too long for any cat. And there were claw marks extending past the toes, like whatever made them had claws that could come out and go back in. I followed the tracks into the woods. They led uphill again toward the burial ground. But these weren't normal. Animal tracks. Sometimes they showed 4 paws like something running on all 4s, but every few yards they changed to 2 deep impressions, like something had stood up and walked on 2 legs. The tracks led to the same clearing where I'd found the bodies. But now there was something new there. Bones. Hundreds of small bones arranged in careful patterns around the clearing. Rabbit bones, squirrel bones, bird bones, all picked clean and white as chalk. And in the center of it all, 3 sets of human clothing folded neat and tidy. Tom's flannel shirt, Sarah's hiking boots, Amy's little pink t-shirt with a unicorn on it. I reached for my radio. Dead static. Reached for my flashlight to get a better look at the clothes. That's when I heard breathing behind me. Slow, deep breaths. Too loud to be human, too controlled to be an animal. I turned around real slow, flashlight shaking in my hand. Two golden eyes stared back at me from the tree line. About 6 feet off the ground, glowing like coins in the dark. The breathing stopped. Everything stopped. Even the insects quit making noise. Then something stepped out of the shadows. It looked like a wolf at first, big as a bear, dark fur that seemed to swallow light. But then it stood up on its back legs, and I realized it was something else entirely. Something that wore a wolf's shape when it wanted to, but wasn't really a wolf at all. It was looking right at me. Those golden eyes seemed to reach inside my head and flip switches I didn't know existed. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, could barely think. The thing tilted its head like a curious dog. Then it smiled. Wolves don't smile. This thing did. It showed me teeth like broken glass and smiled like it was genuinely happy to meet me. I should have been terrified. Part of me was, but another part of me felt strangely calm. Peaceful even. Like maybe it would be nice to just lie down right here and take a little nap. The thing took a step toward me, then another. Its mouth opened wider and I could see all the way down its throat. It was so dark in there. So well. Coming. My radio crackled to life. Unit 47, this is dispatch. What's your status, Mike? The spell broke. I could move again, think again. The thing's smile disappeared, replaced by something that looked almost like annoyance. Unit 47, please respond. I fumbled for the radio with shaking hands. This is Unit 47. I'm at Devil's Backbone. Everything's fine. When I looked up, the thing was gone. Just dark trees and empty air. But I could still feel it watching me. And somehow, I knew this wasn't over. It was just getting started. 3 more people died before I figured out what we were dealing with. Dr. Martinez was first, the local vet who'd been helping me examine the dead cattle. They found him in his clinic Monday morning, slumped over his desk. Same puncture wounds, same drained, dry look. But his face showed that terrible expression I was starting to recognize. Absolute terror, frozen in place. Then came Bobby Hutchins, a maintenance worker who'd been repairing trail signs in the deep woods. Hikers found his body 20 feet up in an oak tree, like something had thrown him there. The holes in his neck were getting bigger now, more ragged. The third was my partner, Dale Morrison. Dale had been a ranger for 15 years, tough as old boot leather and twice as smart. When I told him what I'd seen at Devil's Backbone, he didn't laugh. He just nodded and loaded extra shells into his shotgun. If something's hunting people in our forest, he said, then we hunt it right back. We went up to the burial ground together that Thursday night, brought enough firepower to stop a grizzly bear and enough lights to turn midnight into noon. Dale set up on one side of the clearing while I took the other. Around 2 a.m., Dale's radio went quiet. I tried calling him. Nothing. Tried again. Static. Then I heard him scream. It wasn't a human sound. It was the no. Something makes when all hope leaves its body at once. I ran toward Dale's position, crashing through brush and briars like a madman. I found him at the base of a big pine tree. Or what was left of him. Dale weighed 200 pounds and could bench press a truck axle, but he looked like a deflated balloon. His eyes were still open, staring up at the branches above him with that same frozen terror. Something moved in the tree. I raised my flashlight and saw it crouched on a thick branch 30 feet up. The thing I'd seen before, but different now. Bigger, more confident. It wasn't trying to look like a wolf anymore. Its body was lean and muscular, covered in dark skin that seemed to shift and change color like a chameleon. Long arms ended in hands with fingers too sharp to be human. Its face was the worst part, almost human, but stretched wrong, like someone had tried to make a person from memory and gotten the proportions all mixed up. But those golden eyes were the same, and they were looking at me like I was next on the menu. The thing dropped from the branch and landed in a crouch. It should have made noise hitting the ground, but it was silent as a shadow. Then it stood up to its full height. Had to be over 7 feet tall. I raised my rifle. The thing tilted its head and made a sound I'll never forget. Not quite a growl, not quite a laugh. Like it found my gun amusing. I fired 3 rounds center mass. The thing staggered back a step, looked down at its chest, then looked back at me. The wounds were already closing. That's when I ran. I crashed through the forest like a deer with wolves on its tail. Branches tore at my clothes. Roots tried to trip me. And behind me I could hear that thing following. Not running, just walking. Taking its time. Like it knew it could catch me whenever it wanted. My truck was 2 miles away. I ran harder than I'd ever run in my life. My lungs burned. My legs felt like rubber. But I kept going because stopping meant dying like Dale. Dying like little Amy Kowalski. I made it to the truck somehow. Dove inside and gunned at the engine. As I pulled away, I saw the thing standing at the edge of the clearing, just watching me go. Still wearing that almost human face. But I could swear it was smiling again. That night, I drove to the county library and read everything I could find about Cherokee folklore. The Cohutta Wilderness had been sacred ground for hundreds of years before white settlers arrived. The Cherokee had stories about creatures that lived in the deep woods, things that wore animal shapes but weren't really animals. One story made my blood run cold. The Cherokee called them blood drinkers who walk like men. According to the legend, they came from the shadow world where hungry spirits lived. They could take any shape they wanted, but their favorite was something between wolf and man. The stories said they appeared every 20 or 30 years when the barrier between worlds grew thin. They fed on blood and life force until they grew strong enough to return to their realm. But first, they had to kill the one who challenged them. I was the challenger now. I'd seen it, hunted it, shot at it, and it knew where I lived. Friday morning, I found dead rabbits arranged in a perfect circle around my cabin. All drained dry, all staring at my front door with glassy eyes. Saturday, it was squirrels and chipmunks. Same arrangement, same message. Sunday morning, I found my neighbor's cat on my doorstep. Poor Whiskers had been Mrs. Henderson's companion for 12 years. Now he was just another calling card from something that was getting impatient. I called the state police, the FBI, anyone who would listen. They all said the same thing, wild animal attacks, probably rabid coyotes. One detective suggested I take a vacation until the pack was dealt with. But I knew it wasn't a pack. It was one creature growing stronger with every victim. And it was playing with me like a cat plays with a mouse. That Sunday night, I didn't go to sleep. I sat in my kitchen with every light on, my rifle across my knees, waiting for something to happen. Around 3 a.m., something scratched at my window. Slow, deliberate scratches, like fingernails on glass. I looked toward the sound but saw only darkness outside. The scratching stopped. Then it started at another window, then another. The thing was circling my house, taking its time, letting me know it could get in whenever it wanted. I heard footsteps on my roof, heavy, careful steps that moved from one end of the cabin to the other. Then silence. My radio crackled to life on the kitchen table. "Mike!" The voice was wrong, too deep, too smooth, like honey poured over broken glass. "Come outside, Mike, let's finish this." I grabbed the radio with shaking hands. "What do you want?" "You know what I want. You've been hunting me. Now I hunt you." "What are you?" A sound came through the radio that might have been laughter. "I'm what your people pushed into the dark places. What you forgot was real. But I remember everything, Mike, and I'm so very hungry." The radio went dead. All my lights went out at the same time. In the sudden darkness, I heard my front door slowly creak open. It had finally come inside. The darkness was absolute, not just dark, empty. Like something had sucked all the light out of the world. I fumbled for my flashlight, but it was dead. The batteries had been fresh that afternoon. My backup light was dead too. Even my watch had stopped glowing. But I could hear breathing in my living room. slow and deep, like something savoring the moment. "I can smell your fear, Mike." The voice came from everywhere at once. "It's delicious." I pressed my back against the kitchen wall and tried to think. The creature could see in the dark, probably better than I could see in daylight. Running would just make me an easier target. But I remembered something from the Cherokee stories. The blood drinkers were powerful, but they had weaknesses. Bright light hurt them. Loud noises could break their hold on people's minds. I still had my emergency flare gun in the kitchen drawer, and there was an air horn in my truck outside. "Where are you going, Mike?" The voice was closer now, right behind me. I dove for the drawer, grabbed the flare gun, and spun around. In the brief flash when I pulled the trigger, I saw the thing standing 3 feet away. Its golden eyes reflected the red light like mirrors. The flare hit its center mass and exploded in brilliant red fire. The creature screamed, not like an animal, but like tearing metal. It stumbled backward, clawing at the burning chemical stuck to its chest. I ran for the back door. The flare had given me 30 seconds of vision, and I used every one. I burst outside and sprinted for my truck. Behind me, the screaming stopped. Then came a sound like wind through dry leaves. The thing was following, and it was angry now. I reached my truck and grabbed the air horn from behind the seat. Just as cold fingers wrapped around my ankle, the creature yanked me to the ground. I rolled over and found myself staring up at its face. The flare had burned away part of its skin, revealing something underneath that wasn't skin at all. It looked like black stone carved into the shape of muscles and bones. "No more games," it hissed. Its mouth opened wider than any human mouth should. Inside, I saw row after row of needle-sharp teeth. I pressed the air horn button and held it down. The sound was deafening. 140 decibels of pure noise. The creature let go of my ankle and clapped its hands over its ears. It stumbled backward, shaking its head like a dog with water in its ears. I kept the horn going until the compressed air ran out. In the blessed silence that followed, I could hear the thing breathing hard. "Clever," it said, "but you can't stay awake forever, and I have all the time in the world." That's when I remembered the old fire tower. The Cherokee Ridge. The fire tower was 3 miles up the mountain. Built in the 1950s, it had been abandoned for 20 years, but it still had the emergency lighting system. Huge floodlights powered by a diesel generator. If I could get them working, I'd have enough light to fight back. I climbed into my truck and gunned the engine. The creature leaped onto the hood, its claws screeching against metal. Through the windshield, I could see its face pressed against the glass. It was grinning again. I floored the accelerator and headed straight for the biggest oak tree I could find. At the last second, I threw myself across the passenger seat. The truck slammed into the tree doing 40 miles an hour. The impact threw the creature clear into the woods. I crawled out through the passenger door. My truck was totaled, but I was alive. And now I was 3 miles from the fire tower with something very angry hunting me. I started running up the mountain trail. The creature followed, but it was being careful now. It had learned to respect my tricks. Every few minutes, I'd catch a glimpse of golden eyes in the trees beside the trail. It was pacing me, waiting for me to get tired. But I'd grown up in these mountains. I knew every rock and root on this trail, and fear is a hell of a motivator. I reached the fire tower just as the first hint of dawn touched the horizon. The old steel structure rose 60 feet into the air, with a small cabin at the top that housed the observation deck and emergency equipment. I climbed the stairs, 3 at a time. Behind me, I could hear claws scraping on metal as the creature followed. The emergency generator was right where I remembered it. I prayed it still had fuel and pulled the starter cord. Nothing. Tried again. Still nothing. Below me, something was climbing the tower. Not using the stairs, climbing straight up the outside framework like a spider. I yanked the starter cord a 3rd time. The generator coughed, sputtered, then roared to life. The cabin filled with light as the floodlights kicked on. The creature screamed and lost its grip on the tower. I heard it hit the ground 60 feet below with a sound like a sack of cement, but it wasn't done. Through the windows, I could see it circling the base of the tower. The lights couldn't reach all the way to the ground, and in the shadows, it was gathering itself for another try. That's when I noticed the lightning rod system. The fire tower had been built to attract lightning strikes and channel them safely to ground. Thick copper cables ran from the rod at the top down through the metal framework to buried ground rods. If I could electrify those cables. The generator had enough power to run the floodlights, but it also had an emergency high voltage output. Used to be for powering radio equipment that needed extra juice. If I could hook that up to the lightning rod system, the creature was climbing again. I could hear its claws on steel getting closer. I found the high voltage output and started connecting cables. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the tools. Sweat poured into my eyes, but I got the connections made just as something started pounding on the cabin door. Boom, boom, boom. The door was solid steel, but the creature was testing it, looking for weak spots. I threw the high voltage switch. Every piece of metal in the fire tower became electrified. 60,000 volts coursed through the steel framework. The creature's pounding stopped immediately. Then came the most horrible sound I've ever heard, like screaming and frying bacon and tearing cloth all mixed together. The smell of burning filled the air, not like burning wood or paper, but something else. Something that had never been meant to burn. The sound went on for 30 seconds. Then silence. I waited until full daylight before I climbed down to look. At the base of the tower, I found a pile of what looked like charcoal and ash, but as I watched, the pile started dissolving. Whatever the creature had been made of, it couldn't exist in our world once it was dead. By the time the rescue helicopter arrived, there was nothing left but a dark stain on the ground that might have been anything. They gave me a medical discharge from the Forest Service. Acute stress reaction, the doctors called it. The official report said I'd suffered a nervous breakdown after my partner's death. The missing campers were never found. The livestock killings were blamed on rabid coyotes that were successfully eliminated. I spent 6 months in a hospital in Atlanta. The doctors were worried about my blood count. I was severely anemic, like I'd lost a lot of blood. But there were no wounds, no sign of bleeding. They couldn't explain it. I could have told them. The creature had been feeding on me a little bit every time we met. Not enough to kill me quickly, but enough to weaken me, like a vampire that only took a sip at a time. Now I work for the State Wildlife Department. Desk job in Atlanta, filing reports and answering phones. Safe and boring. My colleagues think I burned out in the field service. They're not wrong, but I still monitor the reports that come in from rural areas. Animal attacks, unexplained livestock deaths, missing persons cases in wilderness areas. Most of it's normal stuff, real animals doing real animal things. Some of it isn't. I keep files on the unusual cases, stories that remind me of that summer in 1974, and I'm starting to see a pattern. The Cherokee legend said the blood drinkers came back every 20 or 30 years. It's been 25 years since I killed the thing in the fire tower. The math makes me nervous. Last month, I got a report from the Nantahala Forest in North Carolina. 3 cattle found drained of blood, small puncture wounds in their necks. The local ranger thinks it's vampire bats. 2 weeks ago, campers in the Smoky Mountains reported seeing a large wolf walking upright through their campsite. The Park Service found strange tracks the next morning. Canine, but wrong somehow. Too big, too long. Yesterday morning, a veterinarian in Tennessee called about dead pets found completely drained of blood. Same puncture wounds, same impossible precision. It's happening again. Maybe not the same creature, I know I killed that one, but something from the same dark place, wearing the same hungry shape. I've been thinking about that fire tower, about high-voltage electricity and bright floodlights, about Cherokee legends in the spaces between worlds. I'm 57 years old now. My knees creak when I climb stairs. My eyes aren't what they used to be, but I still remember how to track something through the woods, still remember how to fight. The creature I killed had been hunting for weeks before I stopped it. 7 people died while I figured out what I was dealing with. This time, I know what to look for. My resignation letter is already written. I've been collecting the equipment I'll need. Floodlights, generators, high-voltage transformers. Things that can turn darkness into light and flesh into ash. There's a young ranger up in North Carolina named Sarah Chen. Smart kid, wildlife biology degree, grew up in the mountains. She called last week about the cattle killings, said something felt wrong about them. I told her I'd be driving up to take a look. Some hunts never really end. They just wait in the dark places until it's time to begin again. But this time, I'll be ready. This time, I'll be hunting from the start. My name is James Coalfield, but everybody calls me Jimmy. I've been a ranger in the Monongahela National Forest for 16 years now. Before that, I worked down in the coal mines like my daddy and his daddy before him. But that all ended when the mine caved in back in '49. Lost my whole crew that day. I was the only one who made it out. I became a ranger because I needed to be above ground, breathing fresh air instead of coal dust. The mountains of West Virginia became my new home, and I knew every trail, every creek, every hidden valley in these woods. My job was fire prevention mostly, but I helped lost hikers and dealt with problem animals too. September of 1965 started like any other hunting season. The leaves were turning gold and red, and the air had that crisp bite that meant winter was coming. Hunters came from all over to hunt deer and bear in our woods. Most of them were good people who respected the forest, but lately, something was scaring them away. "Jimmy, you got to do something about this thing," said old Pete Hawkins. He'd been hunting these mountains for 30 years. "It's stealing our kills right off the hooks. Tore down my tree stand like it was made of matchsticks." I'd heard this story before from other hunters. They all claimed to see some kind of ape man about 8 feet tall. The thing supposedly walked on 2 legs like a person, but was covered in dark hair and stank something awful. "Come on, Pete," I said, sipping my coffee in the ranger station. "You know those Bigfoot stories are just tales to scare city folks away from buying up the land." But Pete's face was serious. "Jimmy, I seen what I seen. This thing ain't natural, and it's getting bolder. Last night it came right up to my cabin. Scratched at the door like it was trying to get in." I looked at the man's hands. They were shaking. Pete Hawkins wasn't scared of anything in these walls. ODS, not bears, not wildcats, nothing. But something had him spooked real bad. "Tell you what," I said, "let me take a look around your hunting area. Maybe I can figure out what's been bothering you." The next morning I drove my truck up the winding mountain road to the Cranberry Wilderness area. This was the wildest part of our forest, thick old trees that had been growing since before Columbus came to America. If something wanted to hide from people, this would be the perfect place. I parked at the trailhead and started walking. The forest was quiet. Too quiet. Usually you'd hear birds singing and squirrels chattering, but today, nothing. Even the bugs seemed to have gone somewhere else. About a mile in, I found Pete's destroyed tree stand. The wooden platform was 15 feet up an oak tree, but something had ripped it apart like paper. Pieces of wood were scattered everywhere. The metal ladder was bent in half and thrown 20 feet away. That's when I saw the first footprint. It was in a muddy spot near the creek, clear as day. The print was huge, at least 20 inches long and 8 inches wide. It looked like a human foot, but way too big. The toes were thick and spread out like someone who had never worn shoes. I knelt down and took out my measuring tape. Whatever made this print had to weigh at least 500 pounds, maybe more. The track was pressed deep into the soft mud. A stick snapped behind me. I spun around, my hand going to the gun on my belt. But there was nothing there. Just trees and shadows. Still, I had the feeling I was being watched. The hair on my arms stood up, and a cold shiver ran down my back. I took pictures of the footprint and collected some hair samples I found on a nearby bush. The hair was coarse and black, not like anything I'd seen before. It smelled musty, like an old basement mixed with something dead. Walking back to my truck, and I kept looking over my shoulder. Something was following me, I was sure of it. But every time I turned around, there was nothing there. Just that feeling of eyes watching from the dark, places between the trees. That night I called my friend Dr. Sarah Mitchell at the State University. She taught biology and sometimes helped me identify animals. "Jimmy, these hair samples are strange," she said over the phone. "They don't match any animal I know. The DNA is unusual. It's like human hair but different somehow. Where did you find this?" "Up in Cranberry Wilderness. Hunters are claiming they saw some kind of creature." "Well, something made these hair samples. And Jimmy, be careful up there. Whatever this is, it's big, and it's strong. After I hung up the phone, I sat in my cabin thinking. 39 years old, and I'd never seen anything in these woods I couldn't explain. Bears, sure. Mountain lions sometimes. But this was different. Outside my window, an owl hooted. Then another sound drifted through the night. A long, low howl that didn't sound like any animal I knew. It was deep and sad, like someone crying. But there was something angry in it, too. I checked the locks on my doors and windows before going to bed. For the first time since I became a ranger, I was scared of what might be out there in the dark. The next few days brought more reports. Hunters were coming back to town with wild stories. Some claimed their camps had been ransacked while they were out. Others found their trucks covered in huge handprints, as if something had been trying to get inside. "It knows when the moon is full," said Mary Fletcher, who ran the diner in town. "That's when most of the sightings happen. My Uncle Tommy saw it 3 nights ago, clear as day." I decided to spend the night in the woods during the next full moon. If something was really out there, I needed to see it for myself. I set up camp in a small clearing about 2 miles from where I'd found the footprint. I brought my rifle, a camera, and enough food for 2 days. As the sun went down, I built a small fire and settled in to wait. The night was clear and cold. Stars filled the sky like tiny diamonds. Everything seemed normal until about midnight. That's when I heard the wood knocking. Thock, thock, thock. The sound echoed through the trees, slow, steady, like someone hitting tree trunks with a baseball bat. But the knocks were coming from different directions, as if there were several somethings talking to each other. I grabbed my flashlight and rifle. "Hello?" I called out. "Is someone there?" The knocking stopped. Then I smelled it. That terrible stink I'd noticed near the hair samples. It was stronger now, like rotten eggs mixed with wet dog. The smell was so bad it made my eyes water. Something moved in the trees to my left. I swung my flashlight around and caught a glimpse of something big and dark stepping behind an oak tree. It was tall, taller than any man I'd ever seen. "I'm a park ranger," I shouted. "Come out where I can see you." A low growl answered me. It was deep and threatening, like an angry bear, but different somehow, more intelligent. I kept my rifle ready and started backing toward my truck. But as I moved, I realized the thing was circling me. I could hear it moving through the brush, staying just out of sight. Then my flashlight beam caught 2 red eyes staring at me from about 30 feet away. The eyes were huge and glowed like coals in the dark. They were set in a face that was almost human, but wrong somehow. Too wide, too hairy, with a mouth full of sharp teeth. The thing had to be at least 8 feet tall with shoulders as wide as a door. We stared at each other for what felt like forever. Then the creature threw back its head and let out a howl that made my blood turn to ice. It was the same sound I'd heard from my cabin, but up close it was terrifying. Other howls answered from different parts of the forest. There were more of them. The creature stepped toward me, and I could see it clearly now. It walked on 2 legs like a person, but its arms hung down almost to its knees. Its body was covered in thick, dark hair, and its hands looked strong enough to crush a man's skull. "Stay back!" I yelled, raising my rifle. But the thing just tilted its head and made a sound that might have been laughter. Then it turned and walked away, disappearing into the trees like smoke. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by my dying fire with my rifle across my knees, listening to the creatures moving through the forest around me. They never came close enough to see clearly, but I knew they were watching me. At dawn, they were gone. I packed up my camp and drove straight to the office. The first thing I did was call the state police. "You want me to write a report about Bigfoot?" asked Sergeant Williams. "Jimmy, are you feeling okay?" "I know how it sounds, but something's out there, something dangerous." "Look, I'll send a patrol up there tomorrow. But between you and me, you've been working too hard. Maybe you need a vacation." Nobody believed me. I couldn't blame them. I wouldn't have believed it either if I hadn't seen it myself. 2 days later, I got the call that changed everything. "We found a body," said Deputy Morrison. Hunter named Rick Dalton. You better come take a look." I drove up to the site with a sick feeling in my stomach. Rick Dalton was an experienced hunter from Maryland who came up every fall with his buddies. I'd met him several times. He was a good man with a wife and 2 kids. What we found in that tree stand wasn't pretty. Rick was 30 feet up in an old oak tree, or what was left of him was. Something had torn him apart like he was made of paper. Blood covered the tree trunk and forest floor below. His rifle was bent in half and thrown 50 yards away. "Jesus Christ," whispered Deputy Morrison. "What could do something like this?" I looked at the claw marks on the tree trunk. Whatever killed Rick had climbed straight up that tree. The scratches were deep, made by something with incredible strength. "Bears don't climb trees this big," I said. "So what did this?" I didn't answer. I was looking at the ground around the tree. There, clear as day, were more of those huge footprints. The creature had walked right up to the tree, climbed up to kill Rick, then walked away. We brought Rick's body down and called his family. His hunting partner, Jim Crawford, was found wandering in the woods 2 miles away. He was in shock and kept talking about glowing red eyes and hands like a man but bigger. "It came out of nowhere," Jim told us at the hospital. Rick was in the tree stand and I was on the ground. I heard him scream, and when I looked up, this thing was climbing the tree. It was huge, 8 feet tall at least. Had human-like hands but with claws. Its eyes glowed red in the dark. "What did you do?" asked the doctor. "I ran. God help me, I left Rick and ran. But the thing didn't chase me. It was too busy with—" Jim couldn't finish. He started crying. That night, I sat in my cabin looking at the photos I'd taken. The footprints were real. The hair samples were real. Rick Dalton was really dead. Something was hunting in my forest. Something that walked on 2 legs and had the strength to tear a man apart. Something smart enough to climb trees and cruel enough to let one victim escape to tell the story. I loaded my rifle with the biggest bullets I could find. If that thing came for me next, I'd be ready. But deep down, I wondered if bullets would be enough. After Rick Dalton's death, the governor sent in a special team to hunt whatever killed him. They brought dogs, helicopters, and enough firepower to fight a small war. I guided them to all the places where the creature had been spotted. The dogs were useless. Every time we got near a fresh trail, they would whimper and refuse to follow the scent. Even Max, the best tracking dog in the state, took one sniff of those huge footprints and ran back to his handler with his tail between his legs. "I've never seen anything like it," said handler Pete Martinez. "These dogs will track a wounded bear into hell itself, but they won't go near whatever made these tracks." We found more evidence, though. Trees twisted into spirals 15 feet off the ground, something that would take superhuman strength. Boulders the size of cars moved from their original spots, and everywhere that terrible smell, like death mixed with wet fur. On the 3rd day of the hunt, we found something that made my blood run cold. It was an old mine shaft, one of the abandoned coal mines from the early 1900s. The entrance was hidden behind a fallen tree, but something had been using it. The area around the opening was littered with bones, deer, bear, and some that looked disturbingly human. "My God," whispered Dr. Mitchell, who had come up to study the evidence. Some of these bones show tool marks. Whatever this thing is, it uses tools to cut meat. Inside the mine, we found camping gear that had been reported stolen over the past 6 months. Backpacks, tents, sleeping bags, all arranged like trophies. And scattered among them were personal items, wallets, watches, wedding rings. The creature was keeping souvenirs. "How many people has this thing killed?" asked Captain Rodriguez, the team leader. I counted the personal items. "At least 6, maybe more." That night, as we camped near the mine entrance, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the missing persons reports we'd received over the past year. Hikers who never came back, campers who disappeared without a trace. We'd always assumed they got lost or had accidents. Now I wondered how many of them had ended up in that mine. Around 2 a.m., I heard movement outside my tent. Slow, careful footsteps circling our camp. I grabbed my rifle and crawled to the tent opening. In the moonlight, I could see a massive shape moving between the trees. It was watching us, studying our defenses. When it realized I was looking at it, the creature let out a low chuckle that sounded almost human. Then it spoke. "Jimmy," it said in a voice like gravel. "Jimmy Coalfield." My blood turned to ice. The thing knew my name. "Come out and play, Jimmy. Come see what happened to your mining friends." It was mimicking voices, the voices of my crew who died in the mine collapse 16 years ago. I heard Tommy Murphy's laugh, Bill Crawford's cough, even my old foreman Joe Kowalski telling me to get back to work. "That's not possible," I whispered. But the creature kept talking, using the voices of dead men to try to lure me out of the tent. It knew things only they would know. Inside jokes, personal stories, the last words some of them spoke before the mine caved in. I woke up Captain Rodriguez. "It's out there, and it's trying to mess with my head." Rodriguez looked through his night vision scope. "I don't see anything, but I could still hear it moving in the dark, still hear it whispering with the voices of my dead friends." The other men in the team couldn't hear it, only me. The creature was targeting me specifically, trying to drive me crazy. The next morning, we decided to explore the mine. The shaft went deep into the mountain with tunnels branching off in all directions. Our lights showed old mining equipment covered in rust and decades of dust. "Stay close," I warned the team. "These old mines are dangerous. The supports could collapse at any time." We followed the main tunnel about 200 yards before we found the creature's real lair. It was a large chamber that had been carved out by hand. The walls were covered in strange symbols that looked almost like writing. And everywhere were bones, human bones, arranged in careful patterns like some kind of altar. "Dear God," whispered Dr. Mitchell, "how many people has this thing killed?" In the center of the chamber was a pile of fresh kills. I recognized some of the clothing. A red jacket belonged to Susan Palmer, a hiker who'd disappeared 3 weeks ago. A baseball cap had belonged to Mark Stevens, a camper who'd vanished last month. That's when we heard the sound, a deep rumbling that seemed to come from the walls themselves. The creature was coming back. "Everyone out," I shouted. "Move!" We ran through those dark tunnels as the rumbling got louder. Behind us, I could hear the creature howling with rage. It had found us in its home, and it wasn't happy. Rodriguez turned to fire a shot, and his muzzle flash lit up the tunnel. For just a second, I saw the thing chasing us. It was even bigger than I'd thought, at least 10 feet tall and 800 pounds of muscle and fury. Its red eyes burned like fire, and its mouth was full of teeth like broken glass. We made it out of the mine just as the creature reached the entrance. It stopped there, unwilling to come into the daylight, but its howl of anger echoed through the mountains, and other howls answered it from different directions. There were more of them out there, maybe lots more. That night, 2 members of our hunting team disappeared. We found their torn sleeping bags and blood trails leading into the forest, but no bodies. The creature was fighting back, picking us off one by one. "We need more men," said Rodriguez, "and bigger guns." But I was starting to think that bullets might not be enough. This thing was smart, stronger than anything I'd ever seen, and it knew these mountains better than I did. It was hunting us now, and it was winning. The government team gave up after losing 3 more men. They pulled out at dawn, leaving me alone with my radio and a promise that they'd send reinforcements. We all knew they wouldn't be back. The creature had won this round, but I couldn't leave. This was my forest, my responsibility, and that thing had killed too many innocent people. I spent 2 days planning my attack. The creature lived in that mine, which gave me an advantage. I knew these old mining tunnels. I'd worked in dozens of them before the accident. And I remembered something from my coal mining days that might help: methane gas. Old mines were full of it, colorless, odorless gas that leaked from the coal seams. If you got enough of it in a closed space and added a spark, the explosion would bring down half a mountain. I gathered supplies from the abandoned mining equipment scattered around the forest. Dynamite that was still good, fuses, and a battery-powered detonator. If I could trap the creature in the mine and set off the gas, it would solve everyone's problems. The hard part would be getting close enough to set the charges. I entered the mine at sunset, when the creature would be out hunting. My headlamp cut through the darkness as I made my way to the main chamber. The place still stank of death and that terrible musk smell, but it was empty. Working quickly, I placed charges at key support points throughout the tunnel system. One explosion wouldn't be enough. I needed to bring down the whole network of passages to make sure the creature couldn't escape. I was attaching the last charge when I heard footsteps behind me. "Hello, Jimmy." I spun around, and there it was. The creature stood in the tunnel entrance, blocking my way out. Up close, it was even more terrifying than I'd imagined. Its face was almost human, but wrong. The features too big, too savage. Intelligence gleamed in those red eyes, and when it smiled, I saw rows of sharp teeth. "You've been busy," it said in a voice like grinding stone. "But you made a mistake coming here alone." I pulled out my gun and fired 6 shots center mass. The bullets hit the creature and knocked it backward, but they barely seemed to hurt it. Dark blood oozed from the wounds, but it kept standing. "My turn," it growled. The thing charged at me with impossible speed. I dove to one side, and its claws raked the tunnel wall where my head had been. Chips of stone flew everywhere. I ran deeper into the mine, the creature right behind me. Its claws scraped against the walls as it chased me through the narrow passages. I could hear it, breathing, deep, harsh pants, like a bellows. "You can't run forever, Jimmy," it called. "I know every inch of these tunnels. This is my home." But I knew something it didn't. These weren't just random mine shafts. They followed the old coal seams in a pattern. If I could reach the main chamber, there was another way out through the ventilation shaft. The creature was playing with me, I realized. It could have caught me any time it wanted, but it was enjoying the hunt. This thing didn't just kill for food. It killed for pleasure. "Tell me about the mine collapse, Jimmy," it said, its voice echoing through the tunnels. "Tell me how you left your friends to die." "Shut up," I yelled back. "You heard the supports cracking. You could have warned them. But you ran instead. Left them trapped in the dark while you saved yourself." The words hit me harder than any claws could have, because they were true. I had heard the warning signs, and I had run. 16 men died that day because I was a coward. "That's right," the creature whispered. "You know what you are. You know what you've always been. A coward who lets others die." I reached the main chamber and looked up at the ventilation shaft. It was 20 feet above me, but there was old machinery I could climb. The creature appeared in the tunnel entrance just as I started climbing. "Going somewhere?" it asked. I pulled the detonator from my pocket. "Yeah, far away from you." The creature's eyes widened as it saw the device. "You wouldn't. The explosion would kill you too. Maybe, but it'll definitely kill you." For the first time, I saw fear in those red eyes. The thing was intelligent enough to understand what methane gas could do in a confined space. "Wait," it said. "We can make a deal. I'll leave your forest. Find somewhere else to hunt." "Too late for deals." I pressed the button. The explosion was like the end of the world. Fire filled the tunnels as the methane ignited, and the whole mountain shook. I was blown up through the ventilation shaft like a cork from a bottle, landing hard on the mountainside above. My clothes were on fire, and I couldn't breathe. The gas had burned my lungs, and my skin felt like it was melting. But I was alive. Below me, the mine collapsed in on itself. Tons of rock filled the passages, crushing everything inside. If the creature survived the explosion, it was buried alive under half a mountain. I crawled away from the burning hillside, my body screaming with pain. It took me 3 hours to reach my radio and call for help. As the helicopter carried me to the hospital, I looked back at the mountain. Smoke was still rising from the collapsed mine, and the whole peak looked different, smaller somehow, like a giant had taken a bite out of it. The creature was dead. It had to be. Nothing could survive that explosion and cave-in. But as we flew away, I could have sworn I heard something, a long, mournful howl echoing across the mountains, and in the distance, other howls answered it. I spent 6 months in the hospital. The doctor said I was lucky to be alive. Burns covered 30% of my body, and my lungs were so damaged I'd never breathe normal again. But I was alive, which was more than that creature could say. The official report blamed the mine collapse on unstable geological conditions and illegal mining operations. No mention of monsters or unexplained deaths. The government boys made sure of that. They expanded the Cranberry Wilderness area to include the whole mountain where the mine had been. Put up fences and dangerous area, keep out signs. Nobody would ever be allowed to dig there again. I went back to work as a ranger, but things were different. The other rangers treated me like a hero for surviving the mining accident, but I would see the questions in their eyes. They knew the official story didn't add up, and the sightings continued. Not in the Cranberry Wilderness. That area stayed quiet, like the land itself was holding its breath. But in other parts of the forest, hikers reported strange sounds and glimpses of large, hairy figures moving through the trees. "Jimmy, you got to come see this," said Ranger Bill Martinez one morning. He'd found massive footprints near Spruce Knob, 20 miles from the collapsed mine. The prints looked familiar, 20 inches long, 8 inches wide, with human-like toes. But these were smaller than the ones I'd seen before, maybe a younger creature or a female. "What do you think it is?" Bill asked. I stared at those tracks and felt a chill run down my spine. "I think we've got a problem." That night, I sat in my cabin looking through the secret files I'd started keeping. Photos of footprints, hair samples, witness reports. Everything the government didn't want to admit existed. If more rangers were going to face these things, they needed to know what they were up against. Outside my window, an owl hooted in the darkness. Then, from somewhere deep in the forest came a sound that made my blood freeze. A long, low howl that I'd hoped never to hear again. It was answered by another howl from the opposite direction, and another from the north. I reached for my rifle and checked the bullets. Silver might work better than lead, according to some of the old mountain stories. Tomorrow I'd drive to town and buy some silver bullets from the gun shop, just in case. The creature I'd fought was dead. I was sure of that. Nothing could survive that explosion and cave-in. But it hadn't been alone in these mountains. There were others out there, and now they knew that humans could fight back. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. I picked up my pen and started writing in my logbook. Day 1 after Cranberry Wilderness incident. Evidence suggests multiple creatures still active in surrounding areas. Recommend all rangers carry silver ammunition and work in pairs. The thing I killed was not the only one. Outside, the howling continued through the night. A sound that promised vengeance and spoke of ancient hungers that would never be satisfied. I'd saved the forest once, but at a terrible cost. And I had a feeling that before this was over, I'd have to make that choice again. The Monongahela beast was dead, but its family was very much alive. And they remembered. My name is Catherine Moonbeam, but everyone calls me Kate. I've been a park ranger on the Blue Ridge Parkway for 13 years now, and in that time, I've seen just about everything these mountains can throw at you. Lost hikers, bear encounters, car wrecks on the winding roads, you name it. At 36, I thought I knew these mountains like the back of my hand. I should tell you a bit about myself. My mom was Cherokee, my dad Scottish. Growing up, I heard plenty of ghost stories from both sides of the family. Mom would tell me about spirits that lived in the mountains, while Dad shared tales of banshees and haunted castles. But after spending 8 years as an emergency room nurse before becoming a ranger, I learned to trust what I could see, touch, and prove. Ghost stories were just tourist attractions to bring money into mountain communities, nothing more. My specialty is mountain rescue. I'm trained as an emergency medical technician, And when someone gets hurt or lost up here, I'm usually one of the first people they call. The Blue Ridge Mountains can be beautiful, but they're also dangerous. People don't respect them the way they should. October is always our busiest time. The leaves turn brilliant reds and yellows, bringing tourists from all over the country. They come for the views, but they don't always come prepared for the reality of mountain weather or the narrow, winding roads that can turn deadly in a heartbeat. This particular October started like any other. The colors were especially bright that year, and the crowds were thick every weekend. But there was something different in the air, something that made the hair on my arms stand up when I made my rounds. The animals seemed jumpy. Birds would stop singing when I walked by. Even my dog, Rusty, who usually loved coming to work with me, started whining every time we got near Grandfather Mountain. Grandfather Mountain sits at 5,946 feet, making it one of the highest peaks in the Blue Ridge. The mile-high swinging bridge stretches across a gap between two rocky peaks, giving visitors a view that can take your breath away. It's also the most dangerous spot on my patrol route. Something about that bridge just attracts trouble. The first accident happened on a Tuesday morning in early October. I got the call at 4:17 a.m., single car crash near the bridge, possible fatality. When I arrived, the scene didn't make sense. A blue sedan had gone straight through the guardrail, but there were no skid marks leading up to it. No signs the driver had even tried to brake. The victim was a local man named Tom Bradley, someone who'd driven these roads for 20 years. He knew every curve, every steep drop. Yet somehow, on a clear night with perfect visibility, he'd driven straight off the mountain. What bothered me most was his face. I've seen a lot of accident victims, and you learn to read the story in their expressions. Tom's face was frozen in absolute terror, eyes wide open, mouth twisted in a scream. It looked like he'd seen something that scared him to death. Literally. The accident report listed it as driver error, probably fell asleep at the wheel. But I knew better. Tom Bradley was scared of something in those final moments, something that made him lose control of his car. That should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. 3 days later, it happened again. Same location, same time of night, around 3:30 a.m. This time it was a young couple from Virginia driving back from their honeymoon in Asheville. Their car was found wrapped around a tree about 50 yards from the bridge, but just like with Tom Bradley, there were no skid marks, no signs of braking. I was first on scene again, and what I found didn't make any sense. The husband, Mike Chen, was still alive when I got there. He trapped in the passenger seat. His wife hadn't made it, but Mike was conscious and talking. She was standing right there, he kept saying, pointing toward the bridge with a shaking hand. Right in the middle of the bridge. Sarah swerved to miss her, but then she was gone. Who was standing there? I asked, checking his pulse while we waited for the ambulance. A woman in white, like an old-fashioned dress. She was just standing there staring at us. Mike's eyes were wild with fear. But when Sarah turned the wheel, the woman vanished. Just disappeared. I looked back at the bridge. Empty road, clear night. No sign that anyone had been there. Mike, honey, you've been in an accident, I said gently. Sometimes our minds play tricks on us when we're hurt. But he grabbed my arm with surprising strength. I know what I saw. There was a woman on that bridge, and she's the reason my wife is dead. Mike died in the ambulance on the way to the hospital. His last words were about the woman in white. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Mike's story, about Tom Bradley's terrified face. 2 experienced drivers, 2 clear nights, 2 impossible accidents at the exact same spot. I started doing some research. The mile-high swinging bridge was built in 1940, constructed by local workers and a crew brought in from outside the area. The records were spotty, but I found newspaper clippings from that time mentioning several worker deaths during construction. One article mentioned a disturbance involving local Cherokee families who claimed the bridge was being built on sacred ground. I also found something else. In 1941, just a year after the bridge opened, there was a report of a Cherokee woman named Morning Star who'd gone missing. She'd been working at the bridge as a cleaner and maintenance helper. One day, she simply didn't come home. The investigation was brief. Officials assumed she'd fallen from the bridge during a storm, but her body was never found. The dates bothered me. Morning Star disappeared in October 1941. Tom and Mike had their car accidents in October 2024, exactly 83 years later. I decided to spend some time at the bridge during those early morning hours, just to see for myself what was happening. I packed my emergency kit, a thermos of coffee, and my radio, and drove up there around 2 a.m. on a Friday night. The bridge was empty, of course, just me and the mountain wind. I parked my truck and walked out onto the bridge, looking for anything unusual. The metal walkway felt solid under my feet, and the view was beautiful even at night, valley lights twinkling below, stars bright overhead. That's when I heard the music. It was faint at first, like someone playing a radio far away. Old-fashioned music, the kind my grandmother used to hum. Folk songs with words I couldn't quite make out. I followed the sound, but it seemed to move around me, coming from different directions. Then my radio crackled to life. Not a dispatch call, something else entirely. The voice was female, speaking in what sounded like Cherokee. I didn't understand the words, but the tone was urgent, desperate. "Hello?" I called into my radio. "This is Ranger Moonbeam. Can you repeat your message?" The voice stopped. The music stopped. Everything went completely quiet. No wind, no insects, no night sounds at all. The silence was so complete it hurt my ears. That's when I saw her. Standing at the center of the bridge, maybe 30 feet away from me, was a woman in a long white dress. The dress looked old-fashioned, like something from the 1940s. Her black hair hung loose around her shoulders, and her skin had a pale, almost translucent quality. She was staring right at me. My training kicked in. "Ma'am, are you all right?" I called out, moving slowly toward her. "Do you need help?" She didn't respond, didn't move, just kept staring. As I got closer, I could see that something was wrong with her face. Her eyes were too dark, and when she opened her mouth, no sound came out. I blinked and she was gone. Not walked away, not ran away, just gone like she'd never been there at all. I spent the rest of the night on that bridge, but nothing else happened. When the sun came up, I drove back to the ranger station and wrote up a report about unusual electromagnetic activity near the bridge that might be causing radio interference. I didn't mention the woman, but I knew I'd seen her, and I was starting to understand that Mike Chen had been telling the truth. Over the next 2 weeks, 3 more people died at the mile-high swinging bridge, all in the early morning hours, all single-car accidents with no explanation, all drivers with terrified expressions frozen on their faces. The Park Service was getting pressure from the media and the families. How could 5 people die in the same spot in such a short time? They brought in highway safety experts, installed better lighting, put up additional warning signs. Nothing helped. I knew it wouldn't help, because the problem wasn't the road or the bridge or the lighting. The problem was Morning Star. I started researching Cherokee history in the area, and what I learned made my blood run cold. During the bridge construction in 1940, there had been serious conflicts between the construction crew and the local Cherokee families. The families claimed the bridge location was sacred ground, a burial site for their ancestors. The white foreman, a man named Jack Morrison, had been known for his racist attitudes toward the Cherokee workers. According to an elderly Cherokee man named Samuel Crow Feather, whom I tracked down at the reservation, Morning Star hadn't just disappeared. She'd been murdered. "My grandmother told me the story," Samuel said when I visited him. "Morning Star was trying to protect the burial ground. She would sneak onto the construction site at night and perform ceremonies to honor the dead. Morrison found out and threatened her. One night he followed her up there." "What happened?" I asked. Samuel's eyes were sad. "Morrison killed her, beat her to death with a piece of rebar from the construction site. Then he buried her body right in the bridge foundation, where no one would ever think to look." "Did anyone report this to the police?" "This was 1940, Samuel said quietly. "A Cherokee woman's word against a white foreman's?" My people knew better than to expect justice from the law. I felt sick. If Samuel was right, then Morning Star's body was still there, trapped under tons of concrete and steel, and her spirit was trapped too, bound to the place where she died. Why is she killing people now? I asked. Samuel was quiet for a long moment. The dead don't rest easy when justice is denied. Morning Star is angry. She's been angry for 83 years, and now she's taking revenge on anyone who reminds her of the men who killed her. That night I went back to the bridge. I had to try to communicate with her, to understand what she wanted. I brought offerings, tobacco and sage, things Samuel had told me were important in Cherokee tradition. She appeared almost immediately this time, materializing in the same spot as before. But now I could see her more clearly. Her white dress was torn and dirty, stained with what looked like blood. Her face was bruised, and her neck sat at an unnatural angle. "Morning Star?" I called out softly. She turned toward me, and I saw recognition in her dark eyes. She could understand me. "I know what happened to you," I said. "I know Morrison killed you. I know you were trying to protect the sacred ground." Her mouth opened, and this time I heard her voice, not with my ears but inside my head. The words came in Cherokee, but somehow I understood them. They buried me in shame. They covered my voice with their concrete and steel, but I remember. I remember their faces, and I see them in every man who crosses my bridge. "The people you're killing are innocent," I said. "They don't know about Morrison or what he did to you. All men are Morrison to me. All men are guilty." I felt her anger then, a wave of rage and pain that nearly knocked me to my knees. 83 years of trapped fury, of injustice denied, of a voice that couldn't be heard. "What do you want?" I asked. "Justice, recognition, a proper burial for my body and my people's bones." Before I could respond, she was gone again, but her message was clear. Morning Star wasn't just angry about her own murder. She was angry about the desecration of the entire burial ground. The bridge had been built on top of Cherokee graves, and all those spirits were restless. The next morning brought another death. This time it was a Park Service engineer named Dave Walsh, a good man with 2 kids, who'd been sent to inspect the bridge structure for safety issues. His truck was found at the bottom of a ravine, but witnesses said they'd seen him walking on the bridge just minutes before. A maintenance worker named Tony Ricci told me he'd been watching Dave through binoculars when it happened. "Dave was just standing there looking at the bridge supports," Tony said. Then all of a sudden, he started backing away from something. He looked terrified, like he was seeing a ghost. Then he just turned and ran, but he was running blind, ran right off the edge. I knew Morning Star was escalating. She was no longer content to wait for random drivers in the night. She was actively hunting now, and anyone who got too close to her bridge was in danger. I had to find a way to stop her before she killed again. But how do you stop a ghost who's been angry for over 80 years? How do you give justice to someone who's been dead since 1941? The answer, I realized, lay in Samuel Crowfeather's words. Morning Star wanted recognition, justice, and a proper burial. If her body really was buried in the bridge foundation, maybe there was a way to find it. And if there was a way to give her and the other spirits the respect they deserved, maybe they would finally be at peace. But first I had to survive another encounter with her. And I had the feeling that the next time we met, she wouldn't be as patient with my questions. I spent the next 3 days preparing for what I knew would be my final confrontation with Morning Star. I met with Samuel Crowfeather again, and this time he brought his nephew, a young man named Robert, who was studying Cherokee traditions and spiritual practices. "If you're going to help Morning Star find peace," Samuel told me, "you need to understand what was taken from her. It wasn't just her life, it was her purpose as a protector of the dead." Robert showed me historical maps of the area before the bridge was built. The entire hilltop had been a Cherokee burial ground, with graves dating back hundreds of years. When the bridge construction began, dozens of graves had been disturbed or destroyed. Morning Star was what we call a Tsalagi Anvi, a guardian of the ancestors, Robert explained. Her job was to make sure the dead were honored and protected. When Morrison killed her and buried her with the very people she was trying to protect, he trapped her in a cycle of obligation she can never fulfill. "So how do we break the cycle?" I asked. "We have to find her body," Samuel said. "And we have to perform the proper burial rites, not just for her, but for all the disturbed graves. Only then will the spirits be at peace." The problem was, I had no authority to order excavation of the bridge. The paperwork alone would take months, and in the meantime, more people would die. I had to find another way. That night, I went back to the bridge with a different plan. Instead of trying to communicate with Morning Star from a distance, I was going to let her show me exactly where her body was buried. It was dangerous. She was getting more violent with each encounter, but it was the only way. I arrived at the bridge at 2:30 a.m. and she was waiting for me. This time she looked different, more solid, more real. The anger radiating from her was almost visible, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. "Morning Star," I called out. "I want to help you. Show me where Morrison buried you." She pointed toward the south foundation of the bridge, where the concrete met the natural rock of the mountain. Then she beckoned for me to follow her. As I walked toward the spot she'd indicated, the temperature dropped at least 20 degrees. My breath came out in visible puffs, and frost began forming on the bridge railings. Morning Star moved ahead of me, not walking but gliding, her feet never touching the ground. She stopped at a specific spot and pointed down. Even in the darkness, I could see that this section of the foundation looked different from the rest. The concrete was slightly discolored, and there were cracks that didn't appear anywhere else. "She's here?" I asked. Morning Star nodded, then placed her translucent hand on my shoulder. Suddenly, I could see what had happened in 1940 as clearly as if I'd been there. Morrison dragging Morning Star's body across the construction site. The sound of shovels on rock as he and two other men dug a shallow grave right where the foundation would be poured. Morning Star's broken body being thrown into the hole like garbage, covered with dirt and stones from the other disturbed graves. Then the concrete trucks arriving at dawn, pouring their load right over the hastily covered grave. Morning Star and dozens of Cherokee ancestors sealed forever under the bridge they'd died trying to protect. The vision ended, and I found myself on my knees crying. The injustice of it was overwhelming. These people had been protecting sacred ground, and they'd been murdered and buried in shame for their efforts. "I understand now," I whispered. "I understand why you're so angry." Morning Star knelt beside me, and for the first time, her presence felt peaceful instead of threatening. She spoke again, this time in English. "Help us," she said. "Free us. Let us go home." I knew what I had to do, even if it cost me my job. The next morning, I called in a favor from an old friend who worked in construction. Bobby Martinez owed me for pulling him out of a ravine 3 years earlier when his hiking trip went wrong. I told him I needed him to bring a small excavator up to the bridge, no questions asked. "Kate, you know I'd do anything for you," Bobby said, "but what you're asking for sounds illegal." "It's not illegal if we're investigating a crime scene," I said. "And Bobby, this is a crime scene. Trust me." He agreed to meet me at the bridge that afternoon. I also called Samuel and Robert, asking them to bring whatever they needed for a proper burial ceremony. When we all gathered at the bridge, I explained what I'd learned from Morning Star. Bobby looked skeptical until I showed him the exact spot where the concrete was cracked and discolored. "You're right," he said, examining the foundation. "This section was definitely poured separately from the rest. And recently, too, I'd say within the last few years, someone tried to patch some cracks here." It took Bobby's excavator less than an hour to carefully remove the damaged concrete. What we found underneath made us all go silent. Human bones. Dozens of them, mixed together in what had once been separate graves. And at the center of the jumbled remains, a woman's skeleton wearing the tattered remains of a 1940s dress. "Morning Star," Samuel whispered. As soon as her bones were exposed to daylight, I felt a change in the air. The oppressive presence that had haunted the bridge for weeks was gone, replaced by something that felt like relief. Robert and Samuel performed a traditional Cherokee burial ceremony right there on the mountain. They burned sage and cedar, sang ancient songs, and spoke words of honor and respect for Morning Star and all the other disturbed spirits. It took hours, but when it was finished, I felt peace settle over the mountain like a soft blanket. We reburied the remains in a proper Cherokee cemetery on the reservation, with Morning Star in a place of honor, as befitted her role as a guardian of the ancestors. The ceremony was beautiful and sad and healing all at once. That night I went back to the bridge one last time. Morning Star appeared to me, but now she looked completely different. The anger was gone from her face, and her dress was clean and white. She looked young and peaceful, the way she might have looked in life before Morrison destroyed everything. "Thank you," she said, her voice like wind through the trees. "We can rest now." "I'm sorry it took so long," I said. "I'm sorry for what they did to you." She smiled. "Justice delayed is not justice denied, as long as someone remembers. You remembered. You listened. You acted." Then she was gone, but not like before. This time, she faded gently, like morning mist touched by sunlight. The accidents at the mile-high swinging bridge stopped completely after Morning Star's reburial. The Park Service credited improved safety measures, and I let them think that. Some truths are too big and too strange for official reports. I received a commendation for my work in reducing the accident rate on the Blue Ridge Parkway. The citation mentioned my innovative approach to highway safety analysis and dedication to public welfare. If they only knew. My relationship with the Cherokee community deepened after the events at the bridge. Samuel Crowfeather invited me to learn more about my mother's heritage, and I began attending cultural events and language classes on the reservation. For the first time in my life, I felt connected to that part of myself that I'd always kept at arm's length. Robert became a good friend, and through him I learned about other places on the parkway where Cherokee history had been forgotten or ignored. We worked together, unofficially, to make sure those stories weren't lost. I also started carrying sage and tobacco in my emergency kit, and I wore a sea of traditional Cherokee jewelry that Samuel's wife made for me. Call it spiritual protection or just peace of mind, but it made me feel safer during high-risk rescues. The bridge itself felt different after Morning Star found peace. Visitors often commented on how beautiful and serene it was, how the mountain views seemed especially clear from that spot. The negative energy that had accumulated there for over 80 years was finally gone. But I learned something important from this experience. The mountains are full of stories that don't make it into the history books. Stories of injustice and forgotten voices, of people who died protecting things that were sacred to them. As a ranger, it's my job to protect people from the dangers of the mountains, bears, weather, treacherous trails. But now I understand that sometimes the greatest dangers come from ignoring the past, from failing to honor the people who came before us. I still patrol the Blue Ridge Parkway, and I still respond to emergencies and help lost hikers find their way home. But now I also listen for other voices in the mountains, other stories that need to be told, because sometimes the dead are just waiting for someone to remember them. And sometimes that remembering is the only thing that can set them free. 3 months after Morning Star's burial, I was walking along a trail near Craggy Dome when I heard singing. Cherokee songs, carried on the wind. When I looked around, I saw her one last time. Morning Star, standing among the rhododendron bushes, no longer trapped or angry. She was surrounded by other figures in traditional Cherokee clothing, all of them peaceful, all of them free. They were finally home, finally at rest. Morning Star saw me watching and raised her hand in a gesture of goodbye and gratitude. Then they all faded into the mountain mist, leaving only the sound of wind through the tree, and the knowledge that some wounds, no matter how old, can still be healed. The Blue Ridge Mountains keep their secrets well, but sometimes if you know how to listen, they'll share them with you. And sometimes that's enough to change everything. My name is Robert Nighthawk, but everyone calls me Bobby. I've been a park ranger at Shenandoah National Park for 21 years now. That's long enough to see just about everything these mountains can throw at you. Bears, lost hikers, drunk campers, drug dealers using the back trails. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what happened in August of 1983. I'm 48 years old, half Lakota on my mother's side, though I grew up in Richmond. Did 2 tours in Vietnam before coming home and finding my way to these Blue Ridge Mountains. The Park Service liked that I could track anything, read the woods like a book, and handle myself when things got rough. Most days that meant helping tourists find their cars or talking some city kid out of feeding the bears. Simple stuff. The thing about being half native is people expect you to believe in all kinds of spirits and magic. Truth is, I left most of that behind in Southeast Asia. After you've seen what humans can do to each other, stories about monsters don't seem so scary anymore. My grandmother used to tell me about skinwalkers, evil witches who could steal people's faces and wear them like masks. But those were Navajo legends from out west, nothing to do with Virginia mountains. That August was brutal hot, the kind of heat that makes the air shimmer above the asphalt on Skyline Drive. Every campground was packed with families trying to escape the city heat, which just meant they brought it with them. Kids crying, parents fighting, everyone sweaty and miserable. I'd been working double shifts because 2 other rangers were out sick. It was a Tuesday morning when the Hendersons came to my station. Nice family from Baltimore. Dad worked for the phone company, Mom was a teacher, daughter named Sarah was maybe 16. Pretty girl with long brown hair and her mother's green eyes. They'd been camping at Big Meadows for 3 days. "Something's wrong with our daughter," Mrs. Henderson said. She was trying not to cry, but I could see it in her face. That look parents get when their world starts falling apart. "What kind of wrong?" I asked, pouring them coffee from the pot I kept going all day. Mr. Henderson looked at his wife, then back at me. "This is going to sound crazy, but we don't think that's our Sarah anymore. I've heard a lot of strange things from stressed-out campers. Heat does funny things to people's minds." "Tell me what happened." "Yesterday evening, Sarah went for a walk by herself, just down to the creek, maybe a quarter mile from our campsite. She's done it every day since we got here." Mrs. Henderson's hands shook as she held her coffee cup. "She came back an hour later, but something was different." "Different how?" "The way she walks, the way she talks. She speaks in some language we've never heard before, and she's so strong now. Last night she lifted our cooler with one hand. That thing weighs 80 pounds when it's full." I nodded, writing this down. Probably the girl hit her head. Maybe had some kind of episode. "Where's Sarah now?" "Back at camp with her. With the thing that looks like her." Mr. Henderson's voice cracked. "She won't look in mirrors, and she ate a whole raw fish she caught with her bare hands. Just bit into it like an apple." The hair on my neck stood up, but I kept my voice calm. "I'll come take a look. Sometimes head injuries can cause strange behavior." We drove up to their campsite in my patrol truck. The moment I saw the girl, I knew something was wrong. She looked exactly like Sarah Henderson. Same face, same hair, same green eyes. But she stood too still, like a deer that knows it's being watched. When she turned to look at me, her pupils didn't change size even though we'd just stepped from bright sunlight into shade. "Hello, Rand." "Sure, Bobby," she said. Her voice sounded like Sarah's, but the words came out wrong, like she wasn't used to speaking English. "Hi there, Sarah. Your parents are worried about you." She smiled, and I saw her teeth. They looked sharper than they should. "I am fine, very fine. Never been better in my life." That's when I noticed the smell, like wet dog mixed with something rotten. And under that, another scent I recognized from my tracking work, the musky smell of a predator. I spent the next 2 hours with the Henderson family, watching this thing that looked like their daughter. It knew things about Sarah's life, her favorite color, her boyfriend's name, what she got for Christmas last year. But it got other things wrong. It called Mrs. Henderson by her first name instead of Mom. It didn't know that Sarah was allergic to bees, small things that only family would notice. The temperature was over 90 degrees, but Sarah, or whatever it was, never sweated, not once. And when a butterfly landed on her arm, it immediately flew away like it had touched something poisonous. I need to take Sarah to the camp doctor, I told her parents, just to make sure everything's okay. Dr. Martinez had been the camp medic for 5 years. Good man, used to dealing with everything from scraped knees to heart attacks. He took one look at Sarah and frowned. Her body temperature is 104 degrees, he told me quietly. But she shows no signs of fever. No sweating, pulse is normal, breathing's fine. It's like her body just runs hot naturally. Could she have hit her head? No signs of trauma, but there's something else. He showed me the blood sample he'd taken. This doesn't look right under the microscope. The cells are different somehow. I'd like to send it to Richmond for analysis. That evening, I made my rounds through the campgrounds. Everything seemed normal until I got to Dr. Martinez's cabin. The door was standing open, which wasn't like him. He always locked up tight before bed. I found him inside, lying on his cot. At first I thought he was just sleeping until I got closer and saw his neck. 2 puncture wounds like a snake bite, but too big. His skin was white as paper. When I checked his pulse, there was nothing. The man had been drained dry. I called it into the state police, but kept my suspicions to myself. No point telling them I thought a 16-year-old girl might have killed him by drinking his blood. They'd have me committed. The next morning, Sarah Henderson was gone. I found her parents searching through the woods, calling her name. She left sometime during the night, Mrs. Henderson said. Didn't make a sound. When we woke up, her sleeping bag was empty. We organized a search party, me, 2 other rangers, and a dozen volunteers. It didn't take long to find tracks leading away from the Henderson campsite. But these weren't human footprints. They started out looking like Sarah's hiking boots, then gradually changed into something else, something with claws. The trail led deep into the forest, away from all the marked paths. I followed it for 3 miles before finding what I was really looking for, Sarah Henderson, the real one. She was buried under a pile of leaves and branches, but she was alive, barely. When we dug her out, she was unconscious, dehydrated, covered in scratches, but breathing. At the hospital in Luray, Sarah woke up screaming. It took an hour to calm her down enough to talk. It came to me by the creek, she whispered. Looked like an old man at first, but his eyes were wrong. Yellow, like a wolf's. He touched my face and everything went black. When I woke up, I was underground. I could hear my own voice talking to my parents, but it wasn't me. What did this old man look like? That's the thing. He kept changing. One minute he looked like a homeless guy. The next he looked like someone else, like he couldn't decide what face to wear. She grabbed my arm. Is my family okay? Did it hurt the... Em? I lied and told her everyone was fine, but I was thinking about Dr. Martinez and wondering what else this thing might do while wearing Sarah's face. That night, I got a call from Big, Meadows Campground. Federal agents had arrived and were asking questions about the Henderson case. When I drove up there, I found 3 men in dark suits questioning campers. One of them, Agent Stevens, pulled me aside. We understand you were the first responder to the Henderson incident, he said. We'd like your full report. What's the FBI's interest in a missing girl case? We have reason to believe this might be connected to similar disappearances in other national parks. He showed me a folder full of photographs. Missing people from Yellowstone, Glacier, Great Smoky Mountains, all found days later acting strange, speaking unknown languages, displaying unusual strength. What do you think is causing it? Agent Stevens closed the folder. That's classified, but we need you to help us find and contain the Henderson girl. Sarah Henderson is in the hospital. She's the victim here. No, Ranger Nighthawk. Sarah Henderson is still out there somewhere, and she's extremely dangerous. The thing wearing Sarah's face showed up again 2 days later. A family camping at Lewis Mountain reported that their daughter had made a new friend, a pretty girl with brown hair who knew all about the forest. She'd taught their 8-year-old how to catch fish with her bare hands and could make bird calls that sounded exactly like the real thing. I raced up there with Agent Stevens and his team. We found the little girl, Emma, sitting by herself near the creek. She looked normal, but when she smiled at us, I saw that her baby teeth had been replaced by something sharper. "Where's your friend?" I asked her. "She had to go, but she's coming back tonight. She promised to show me how to hunt rabbits." Emma's voice sounded like herself, but there was something hungry in her eyes. We set up surveillance around the Lewis Mountain campground, waiting for the skinwalker to return. Stevens had brought special equipment, cameras that could see heat signatures, sensors that detected unusual electromagnetic activity, military-grade stuff. "How long has the government known about these things?" I asked him. "Longer than you'd think. We have reports going back to the 1800s. Usually they stay out west in traditional native lands. This is the first time we've seen one this far east." "What are they exactly?" "Near as we can tell, they're some kind of spirit that can possess and reshape human tissue. They study their victims for days or weeks, learning everything about them, then take their place. Perfect mimics, except for a few tells." "Like what?" "Body temperature, unusual strength, dietary changes, and they can't quite replicate human scent. Dogs and wild animals can always tell the difference." As if on cue, a pack of coyotes started howling in the distance. But these weren't normal coyote sounds. They were too organized, too much like they were talking to each other. Around midnight, our sensors went crazy. Something was moving through the woods, something that registered as both human and animal on the thermal imaging. Agent Stevens and his men took positions around the campground while I stayed with Emma's family. The attack came from 3 directions at once. I heard Stevens shout, then the sound of gunfire. Through my radio, I could hear his men calling for backup, their voices full of panic. Something big crashed through the trees near our position. That's when I saw it clearly for the first time. It looked like Sarah Henderson, but wrong in every way. Too tall, too thin, with fingers that were too long and bent at impossible angles. Its skin had a grayish tint, like it was rotting from the inside. When it opened its mouth, I saw rows of teeth like a shark's. "Give me the little girl," it said in Sarah's voice. "She belongs to me now." I raised my survey. Sweepin', but the thing moved faster than anything human should. 1 second it was 20 feet away, the next it had Agent Stevens by the throat, lifting him off the ground with one hand. He emptied his pistol into its chest, but the bullets didn't even slow it down. The skinwalker bit down on Stevens' neck, and I watched his body shrivel up like a raisin. When it was done, it dropped what was left of him and turned toward me. But now it wasn't wearing Sarah's face anymore. It looked exactly like Agent Stevens. "Thank you for the upgrade," it said in his voice. "Much more useful than a teenage girl." I grabbed Emma and her family and ran. Behind us, I could hear the other federal agents screaming. By the time Park Service backup arrived, 3 men were dead, and the thing was gone. The next morning, we found Agent Stevens walking around the visitor center, asking questions about park security protocols and accessing restricted areas with his federal credentials. Except the real Agent Stevens was in a body bag. I tried to warn the other agents, but how do you prove something like that? The fake Stevens knew everything the real one had known: codes, procedures, case files. He even had the man's memories of our conversation the night before. But I noticed things the others missed. The way he held his coffee cup with both hands, like he wasn't used to having fingers. How he never blinked, just stared at people like he was studying them. And that smell, wet dog and death, that seemed to follow him around. It was studying us, learning from us, getting stronger. And I was the only one who knew. I couldn't sleep that night, knowing that thing was out there wearing a federal agent's face. I kept thinking about what it had said to little Emma, that she belonged to it now. The girl was still acting strange, still had those sharp teeth. Whatever the skinwalker had done to her, it wasn't finished. I drove out to the old Civil War battlefield at dawn. My grandmother always said that when you're facing evil spirits, you need to go to a place where the veil between worlds is thin. Battlefields are like that. Too much death in one spot. The skinwalker was waiting for me. It wasn't wearing Agent Stevens' face anymore. Now it looked like my old squad leader from Vietnam, Sergeant Mike Torres. He'd died in a helicopter crash in '68, but here he was, standing in the morning mist like nothing had happened. "Hello, Bobby," it said in Mike's voice. "Been a long time." You're not Mike Torres. I'm everyone you've ever lost, everyone you failed to save. Its face shifted, becoming another soldier from my unit, then another, then my father, who died when I was 12. What do you want? What I've always wanted: to survive, to feed, to become. It stepped closer, and I could see that its edges were blurry, like it couldn't quite hold its shape together. You understand survival, Bobby. You understand what it takes to live when everything around you is trying to kill you. I pulled out the sage bundle I'd brought from home and lit it with my lighter. My grandmother had blessed it years ago, back when I thought such things were just superstition. The smoke made the skinwalker step back. Clever, but sage won't be enough to stop me. It changed again, becoming a perfect copy of myself. I've been in these mountains for over a century, Bobby. I was here when your people walked the Trail of Tears. I fed on their suffering then, just like I feed on it now. You're not from here. You're something that got lost, something that doesn't belong. I belong wherever there's fear, wherever there's death. And I've been very well fed in this place. It gestured around at the battlefield. Do you know how many men died on this spot? How much terror soaked into this soil? The thing was right. I could feel it now, the weight of old death, old fear. This wasn't just any battlefield. This was where the skinwalker had been born, or at least where it had grown straws, long enough to leave its mark on the world. That's why you're here and not out west with the rest of your kind. You're not a real skinwalker at all. You're something else. Something that learned to wear faces by feeding on the dead. Its smile faltered. What I am doesn't matter. What matters is what I'm becoming. And thanks to your federal friends, I now have access to files on every missing person case in the country. Think of the possibilities. I pulled out my service weapon, loaded with the silver bullets I'd made the night before. My grandmother's idea: silver for killing monsters, lead for killing men. You can't kill me, Bobby. I'm already dead. Have been for over 100 years. It started walking toward me, wearing my own face. I was a Confederate soldier who got separated from his unit, found an old Cherokee medicine man dying by a creek and learned his secrets before I put him out of his misery. Death magic. Shape-changing. The power to take on any form. I fired 6 shots center mass. The silver bullets punched holes through the skinwalker's stolen body and it screamed. Not in any human voice, but in something that sounded like wind through dead trees. Black blood poured from the wounds, smoking where it hit the ground. But it didn't fall down. Silver hurts, I'll give you that. It was changing again, becoming something huge and hairy with yellow eyes and too many teeth. But I've had a long time to get used to pain. The fight was brutal. This thing had the strength of 10 men and could change its size and shape at will. One moment I was wrestling with something the size of a bear. The next it was a snake trying to wrap around my throat. Every time I got close to finishing it off, it would shift into the form of someone I cared about. My grandmother, my war buddies, even Sarah Henderson. But the sage smoke and silver bullets had weakened it. Each time it changed shape, it took longer, and the forms became less perfect. I could see the effort wearing it down. Finally, I got my hands around what passed for its throat and pressed the burning sage bundle against its face. The scream it made then was like nothing I'd ever heard. The false skin began peeling away in strips, revealing something underneath that my eyes couldn't quite focus on, something that had never been human. By the power of the 4 directions, I said, reciting the words my grandmother had taught me, by the power of earth and sky, I banish you from this place. Go back to the darkness where you belong. The skinwalker fought against the banishment, but it was weakening. The false faces it wore began melting away like wax, revealing glimpses of its true form, something made of shadow and bone and hungry darkness. With the last of my sage, I drew a circle around us both and continued the prayer. The thing screamed again, and then suddenly it was gone, leaving nothing behind but a pile of rotting leaves and the memory of that terrible smell. The official report blamed the deaths on a serial killer who was never caught. The FBI classified everything above my pay grade, and the surviving agents were transferred to other cases. Little Emma recovered completely after a few weeks, though her parents said she sometimes had nightmares about a lady with too many teeth. Sarah Henderson went back to Baltimore with her family. Last I heard, she was doing fine, though she never went camping again. Can't say I blame her. As for me, I stayed on as a ranger, but things changed. I started carrying sage and silver bullets as part of my regular kit. I pay closer attention to missing person reports, especially when the victims turn up acting strange. And I've built relationships with tribal elders from across the region, learning the old ways my grandmother tried to teach me. The thing is, I don't think the skinwalker is really gone. Banished, maybe. Weakened, definitely. But something that old, that hungry, doesn't just disappear forever. Sometimes, on seas. Till nights when the mist rolls through the valleys, I catch a whiff of that wet dog smell. Sometimes I find tracks that start out human and end up something else. I've placed blessed silver, items at strategic points throughout the park, hidden where tourists won't find them, but where they might do some good. The other rangers think I've gotten a little eccentric in my old age, but they don't ask too many questions. They've learned to trust my instincts about which areas to avoid after dark. 3 years later, I still check every missing person case personally. I still interview families who claim their loved ones came back different. And I still keep my grandmother's prayers ready, just in case. Because here's what I learned in those mountains. Evil doesn't die easy. It hides, it waits, it adapts. The skinwalker I fought may have been banished, but there are other things out there in the dark places of the world. Things that wear our faces and speak our names and know our secrets. The key is being ready for them. My name is Robert Nighthawk, and I've seen what hides behind human faces. I'm 48 years old, and I intend to live long enough to keep these mountains safe from the things that shouldn't exist, even if nobody believes me but the wind.